Okay. Calling the meeting to order. Who will be calling roll call? Sharice?
Akwe-Badu? Bernal?
Here.
Erickson?
Present.
Horn?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Phillips?
Here.
All right. And you have a quorum.
There we go. So I'd like to welcome you all to our final quarterly meeting of 2016. We're happy to be here in the beautiful city of San Diego. Just to put this in a frame of reference, the mission of the Board of Psychology is to advance quality psychological services for Californians by ensuring ethical and legal practice and supporting the evolution of the profession. Our values are transparency, integrity, consumer protection, inclusiveness, excellence, and accountability. We do have a new board member with us today, Ms. Alida Bernal, and she will be getting sworn in. So do you want to come to the front?
Put it on the laws and
Okay. What did I do with the form? There it is. That's it, right? Okay. So I don't pick this up or not, but
Do you want me to hold
yeah.
the laws and regs book?
yeah, would you please? That'd be great. Then I can act like Frank Sinatra. Does she read it off here? Do I read it to her?
You read it to her.
Okay. This is the following oath that we're asking you to take. I, Alida Bernal, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support.
I have to read.
Oh, it's like a wedding vows. Okay. Please repeat after me. Never thought I'd be a minister. I, Alida Bernal,
I, Alida Bernal,
do solemnly swear to or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I am available for weddings and bar mitzvahs. Item number 3 on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. I will remind the board that they may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda in the future. Any public comment? Right, but I'm saying, she wants to say it on the record, so.
If you want to.
Or do you want to say it on the record that you want the agenda items at the top?
We have a public comment right now.
Okay. Oh, well, there we go.
Might as well start early, right? Dr. Joe Lindercrow with the California Psychological Association. This is more a question, so I'm not sure if it needs to be agendized or whether it can be talked about in a committee report. And that is I would like to ask a question about the use of social media for publishing actions against psychologists. And I'm not sure where that fits in.
Well, there is a social media report. There's a report that relates to social media, among other things, so maybe that would be the appropriate
Okay, that's
item on
fine.
the agenda. I think that's item number 9 on the
Okay,
agenda.
great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the next matter on, unless there's further public comment, the next matter is the approval of the board meeting minutes for April 4 of 2016.
And I just want to point out that there are some strike-throughs that apparently didn't get deleted from the minutes, but those will be amended out when the final minutes are posted.
And those strikeouts are on page 2 and 3.
Okay. Any further comments on the board, these set of minutes? Would anybody like to make a motion regarding the minutes?
I move they be accepted as corrected.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Any public comment? Then Ms. Burns, if you would call the roll.
Akwe-Badu, Erickson,
Aye.
Burnell,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item number 5, the approval of the board meeting minutes for August 18th and 19th. I had some minor comments. Oh, you didn't get the hand?
Where is the hand here?
They, can one of you get an extra copy? Oh, 2 extra copies. Why don't, maybe we should move this. Let folks.
Put it
have a
aside and
chance.
go on. Why don't we meet, given the fact that people haven't had a chance to review those, why don't we move those later into the agenda so that there's an opportunity perhaps after lunch to deal with that? Okay. You're back in the spotlight, Ms. Burns. It's time for the budget report, item number 6 on the agenda. No problem.
So, this is our budget report. The Board of Psychology has a budget of $4,962,000. If you want to take a look at some of the attachments, you'll see that we're generally doing well. Our budget analyst is very happy and has no worries about our budget. We'll end up with a $209,145 net appropriation going back into our savings account. Attachment B, if you look at it, you can see that most of our spending is non-discretionary spending. And attachment C just shows all the beginning balance, revenues and transfers and expenditures. You'll also notice in the 2018-19 budget, that is when we are set to get our general fund loan repayment. We have no word that that would be otherwise, so that is still on track as far as we know. And then attachment...
I'm sorry, Ms. Burns, and when was that scheduled for?
2018-19.
And it's been scheduled earlier, I believe.
It had been pushed back.
Okay.
Generally, because our fund is doing so well, they can push us back a little bit more. So, but anytime we got too close, like down to maybe a 3-month reserve, we would be prime candidate to get it earlier. So,
Okay.
But we obviously do rather well, so we don't have to worry about that right now. And then attachment D, has the charts that go through You notice the first one looks a little bit more worrisome with that green line, but that's definitely only with the estimated revenue and estimated spending. And so that actually, when you get to the next one, page 2, you'll see that that's reflective of what we actually bring in and what we actually spend. So the fund is healthy, nothing to worry about. And that's all. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the board?
I have a question. Thank you for the report so far. What do you look at when you decide that it's healthy? I'm not questioning that it is, but I'm trying to kind of understand what goes into that to make that conclusion.
And for us, it's mostly that the bottom line budgeting is fine. We're not so much worried about line items on here as in the ending balance. So we're in the positive. Our general fund loan will come in. Generally, we bring in more revenue and expend less. And so you'll see it's generally good. There is a small structural imbalance, but in the end, it all works itself out. So that's generally what they're worried about. And then you'll notice, like, the Attorney General Fund is that big red item on Attachment A. But that we can always get, it's called an augmentation for a current year if it were to ever be too bad. If we ever didn't balance it all out at the end of the year, then we can get a current augmentation, so. But generally, it's how it shuffles all out at the end, is how our budget analyst explained it. So not so much concerned about each line item, but how it all shuffles out in the end.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Will our budget analyst be coming to the February meeting?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, he will.
Thanks.
He's looking forward to it, actually.
Is there any comments from the public? Hearing none, thank you very much, Ms. Burns. And we're now going to move on to item number 7 on the agenda, the enforcement report. Good morning, Ms. Monterrubio.
Good morning. So the enforcement report is item number 7, and attached to the report is the enforcement overview of activity. The first thing I'd like to discuss is that we have hired Barbara Tanner, who was our former probation monitor, as our new special investigator. Our vacancy is posted right now with CalHR, and it will be posted until November 29th, so we're hoping to get some qualified applicants and hopefully make a decision before the end of the fiscal year.
And that would be for the probation monitor position
Correct.
that Barbara left?
Yes, and Barbara is still helping out with that position. I have another analyst also helping out, and I'm doing all of the intake for probation. So, but hopefully by the end of the fiscal year, we'll have that position filled. Barbara, as our new special investigator, will be handling most of the complex cases, collecting arrest and conviction documents, and interviewing witnesses and testifying at hearings for the board. Since July 1st, the board has received 363 complaints, 12 criminal conviction reports, and all complaints are being opened within 8 days. At the August board meeting, I reported that we were currently working with IEU as part of the Division of Investigation and HQIU. So far, things are going really well with IEU. They have 7 field offices throughout the state, 33 investigators, 7 supervising investigators, and so we're hoping that this one-year pilot program that we're doing, that our cases will be completed within the 12 months. I meet regularly with the liaison for the Division of Investigation, Stephanie Whitley. My next meeting with her is next week on the 22nd. So again, things seem to be going really well. We still have cases at HQIU. They're handling all of our sexual misconduct cases because we do vertical enforcement for those particular cases. Since July 1st, the board has issued 12 enforcement citations. Citation fines are issued for minor violations that do not require formal discipline. For example, those cases involve misleading advertising, minor record-keeping violations. In regards to our discipline, we have referred 18 cases over to the Office of the Attorney General since July 1st. The executive officer and I meet with the senior assistant attorney, Gloria Castro, to discuss procedures and the handling of our cases. And we're meeting with Gloria quarterly, and our next meeting is in December. We are currently monitoring 52 probationers, and of those 52, I am glad to say that no one is out of compliance. And just to remind the board that if someone is out of compliance, there's a couple things that we can do. If it's a minor issue, let's say not submitting a quarterly report, we might issue a citation to that individual. But if it's a new complaint and there is validity to that complaint and we need to take action, we would look to do an accusation and petition to revoke. So, and those cases do get expedited over to the Office of the Attorney General. That is all that I have to report. Oh, one more thing. I just kind of wanted to discuss the snapshot that we've been doing. We send that out every Monday at 2 o'clock to all the board members, letting you know what's coming, what's pending. We're still sending the email out with the mail ballot, giving you 10 days to respond to cases. I just want to remind everyone that if you could please meet the deadline date, that would be greatly appreciated. We're mailing out about 5 to 10 cases per month, but as soon as we get your mail ballot response back, we can meet with the probationer and start that process. So we'd like to have everyone submit their votes by the deadline date if possible. Any questions?
I have a question about the citation program. It's
Yes.
a program that may be a little harder for us to understand because we don't see each citation as it goes out. Could you give us an idea what the dollar amount is for a typical citation, or the range? What proportion of those are actually paid? And if they're not paid, what happens to the licensee?
Sure. We can cite and fine up to $5,000. Typically, for an enforcement citation, you're looking anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500, depending on the violation. If an individual decided not to pay the citation, we could place a hold on their next renewal, so they'd have to pay it before they renewed. We could also send the matter to the Franchise Tax Board to put a lien on. And so eventually, and it may not be right away, we would be able to recoup the fine amount. But typically for the licensees, they do pay, because we do issue citations for unlicensed individuals.
Right.
So the Franchise Tax Board process works really well in that area. But in regards to the licensees, placing a hold on the license and not allowing them to renew the next renewal period, we typically will get our money by that date.
Thanks, that's
Sure.
very clear and helpful.
Can I ask a question? I'm not sure if this is the right place, and so I just want to put it out here, and it may be at another meeting that we discuss this or a different kind of a session. But I would like to have a discussion about the process by which we do the mail ballots and what constitutes something being adopted, non-adopted, or maybe discussed in the meeting. So I'd like to have a discussion about that. I know what the current rules are, but I want to bring that up as something we could discuss.
Ms. Marks, how would we best address that issue?
I'm not entirely sure what materials go out to the board members with their mail ballots, so we can set a discussion for the next meeting to talk about that. Our office also has some materials that give some guidance as to when you would consider adopting versus not adopting, and we can discuss those materials at that time as well.
Okay, that's actually not what I'm talking
Oh,
about,
okay.
but I am talking about when something can come back for a discussion.
Or what your hold policy?
I know what our whole policy
Okay.
is, but I want to discuss that policy.
Okay.
So
So we can-
whenever we can discuss that policy, whenever would be appropriate. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so it's specifically about the hold policy. Sounds like it's another agenda, it's a new agenda item.
I think it would
That's
be,
what I was
yes, yeah.
thinking.
So
Yeah.
why don't we put it on the agenda for February meeting?
Okay,
So
thanks.
I think the board does have a published policy for holding for discussion.
We do.
Right.
So.
And what we do
so we just
typically,
bring
as
that
Dr.
back.
Horn was stating, is we send out the mail ballot. We attach what is called the explanation of mail ballot terms, which explains what hold means. So I understand what Dr. Horn is asking, and I think we can
So we just
discuss
need
that
to
at the
take a look.
February meeting. Correct.
Take another look at
Yes.
that policy.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you so very much. I truly appreciate the snapshot. And I know that I thought you were going down the line initially, Dr. Horn, from what the licensing committee talked about probably about a year ago, perhaps, about the batching process. I thought you were talking about that piece. Because remember, we talked about that at one level at licensing committee when we were reviewing documents. And so I don't know if that is appropriate at that point, too, but I know that that was something that we had talked about as a committee and a while ago. But I don't think we discussed it as a board.
So maybe looking at some of the policies around enforcement. I mean, a more general topic, I think, is, with a couple of, would that be, I don't know, I don't know how to state it, but so that people will know what we're they'll know what we're going to be talking about, I guess. So it'd be something more general about enforcement policies or something like that.
Maybe Ms. Monterrubio and I can come up with something and then send it to you and Ms. Jones to review, just so we can make sure we capture the agenda item.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ms. Monterrubio, I did want to ask you one question. It says there are currently 40 probationers in told status. Are those people that have moved out of state?
Not necessarily. Those could be individuals that just are not practicing in our state but are residing here in California.
Okay,
they
and
can be
that
in
would
a-
be a tolling provision as well.
Correct, and they can be in a tolling status for however long they choose. So, yes.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm sorry. Again, I'm constantly struck by this, and I want to thank enforcement. I feel the same thing about licensing. In a month, we get more complaints or inquiries or whatever, requests, sometimes than another state has licensees. And I'm just amazed at what an incredible job y'all are doing and how quickly you're able to get your work done. I say that for both enforcement and licensing, but I'll say it for licensing later, It's just amazing to me. So y'all really do a great job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments or questions as it relates to enforcement? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Monterrubio.
You're welcome.
The next item on our agenda is the Executive Officer's Report. Ms. Surick.
Good morning. Included in the meeting materials is an organizational update from the Department of Consumer Affairs, as well as an update for the Board of Psychology. I will go ahead and go to the Board of Psychology update unless there's any questions from the board on the DCA update.
No, I just want to say thank you for providing that for us.
Absolutely. And I want to say thank you to Ms. Lawley, who's the Board and Bureau Relations Deputy, for providing this for the meeting materials. So the staffing update for the board, just to announce that we hired Connor Leitzel, our new student assistant. Keisha Braxton is our new office technician. Sharon Pereira will be starting at the end of the month as our new licensing analyst. We have Barbara Tanner is our special investigator that was promoted. And Margene Dupree, because of the approval of the budget change proposal, she transitioned from permanent intermittent to a full-time permanent employee in the Central Services Unit. Chris Siepert is now a permanent full-time licensing analyst in our licensing unit, which we're very excited about, as is he. And then we'll be talking about this later, but we have our licensing coordinator will be retiring next month, Miss Karen Johnson. So this is our last board meeting with her here, and she has some very large shoes to fill. So the last item is we have the probation coordinator position pending right now, and that is our only current board vacancy. So the last month has been very active on the human resources front. So some really great new people in the office, and we're very excited to have almost a full staff, so that's great. Item C is the DCA annual report. This is a report that the board puts together every year and submits to the Department of Consumer Affairs. This is draft form at this stage. It has not been finalized by Department of Consumer Affairs, but this was the data that the board collected and submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs. Once this information is compiled from all the boards and bureaus, it is submitted to the state legislature each year. Any questions about the report? Okay. That concludes the executive officer report.
Thank you, Ms. Sorick. Wow, we're moving like a hot butter through knife, or hot knife through butter, hot butter through knife. Must have more caffeine. Next on the agenda is the Outreach and Education Committee report and consideration and possible action on committee recommendations. Ms. Bernal.
Thank you. It was my first chair meeting, which was, we had lots to cover. And so, as we can see here in section 9, obviously our strategic plan updates. Antoinette, would you like to give a brief overview?
Sure. Included in the meeting materials is the strategic plan update. This item is updated for each board and outreach and education committee meeting. These are the goals and objectives that the board laid out for staff and the board to accomplish. Action items were developed and timeframes were set for each action item. There's a status update for each action item, and that is updated on a quarterly basis, if not more frequently. This is as of October 2016. And any item that has been moved typically because of a regulatory change that's needed or a legislative change. So that is pushed out to what is a more likely time frame. So any questions about the strategic plan update?
I have a question. When did we actually do the strategic plan again? I just want to know how many years in we are.
We approved it, or the board approved it in 2014, so it's a 5-year strategic plan. So technically, it ends 2018, and then we'll start the planning process for the next strategic plan.
Since there are so many agenda items, I just wondered if there's any board comment on that particular item.
Yes. It's so wonderful to see so many completed, and I did not keep my document from last year. Besides, looked at all the completed in the last board meeting. Where is the outreach piece about the affinity groups? I know that was the one that I was tracking, and so I know that we were going to work on that for Q1 2017, I think. So I just want to know, how are we doing on that one? Because that was my main question on the last meeting.
Absolutely. We're very excited to have Connor Leitzel, our new student assistant. One of his top priorities is developing a targeted stakeholders list so that when we are ready for pathways and any other policy issues, we can do some targeted emails, targeted mailings. When we have board meetings, things that come up, we have a very small stakeholders list right now. And we also want to be able to capture those that are following us on Twitter, those that are liking us on Facebook. So we do have those individuals and groups as well. So we want to be able to somehow capture that and let you guys know what groups we're communicating with and whatnot. But that is Connor's project, and Ms. Burns can probably expand on that.
And what I would definitely expand on is that what we've talked about with Connor is that we'd like to broaden who we're reaching out to, and part of that is also going to be creating multiple types of listservs. So you may only be interested in maybe our outreach and education, or maybe you're only interested in licensing, or maybe the subject of telehealth might really interest you, and that way you're not getting all of our mailings all of the time. So part of that is going to be looking at what kind of listservs should we have, and then reaching out to those other broad stakeholders, NAMI, the big mental health, and then also outside of those, different advocacy groups, different consumer groups. So I've got him kind of doing the big, broad search and starting one piece at a time. But that's, him and I have been working together to develop that. So, and he loves big research projects, so he's diving right in, so.
Thank you, and I'm really excited by that, because I think at some point that would be great to have that be a full report out to the board, because I know that was something that several of our public members have asked in the past, but I'm glad, welcome aboard, Connor. I'm glad that we have that capacity.
Absolutely, and we'll be updating the Outreach and Education Committee, and of course, back again at the board as we're doing this, so.
Thank you. Now our update on our communications plan. Ms. Sorick, would you also like to?
Absolutely.
Update.
Included in the meeting materials is the updated communications plan, and it's a really good segue from our whole discussion about stakeholders. We have certain communications that we send out, newsletters, advisories, meeting materials, regulation notices. So I think in developing our stakeholders list, we're going to have a much more effective communication plan. So this will be, as the stakeholders list change, I think this will be changed as well to reflect how we're targeting our messages. So I'm happy to entertain any questions the board might have.
No? Okay. And Ms. Burns, could you please give us an update on our social media? Please.
Absolutely. So on Facebook, we now have total likes of 337, and you'll see on the graphs that are following that we are continuing to increase. On Twitter, we now have 172 followers, and we're following 234, and we have 372 tweets. And again, that is also increasing over time. So we are getting a larger social media presence. And then if you look at the board meeting webcast, and we have double-checked this multiple times, the August 18th had 1,704 views. And, of course, we don't know why that is or if all of them are doing it, but we did have a petition hearing, which was quite interesting. And we also had the End-of-Life Option Act preview. So I don't know if maybe we're also hitting a lot of people that wanted to know about those two issues. Maybe we're hitting more students, I'm not sure. But we had a lot of views that day. It was a very huge spike, so.
Now, if somebody were to, let's say, log off for a little while and come back to it, that would be another hit, wouldn't
Yeah, it would be another view.
So people that were doing it intermittently get
Exactly.
get overcounted, I guess.
So it's not as specific as, oh, that IP address we only count it once, but yes. Although I guess if you wanted to watch us multiple times, that's also a positive thing. No choice.
Also on that day, was that the day of the ASPPB presentation?
Yes, that too. So we had quite a busy day that day, so it's a lot of good, juicy conversation, so.
Great.
Pretty big spike there. And of course, there's also the graphs, the YouTube videos, lots of views of those. 3,135 for the application video, 2,166 for the registered psychologist. And then the psychological assistant registration, 4,714. And of course, we'll be updating these as things change with our sunset provisions and getting new videos out. So we'll have new things to report over the next year or so. And this is just for your information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions?
I have a question. It's about our YouTube videos. At this point, they're not out of date, right?
No, not yet.
Everything is correct. So we're not going to run them once they get out of date, are we? You know, we're going to take them down and then recreate them and...
January 1, we will take them down
Okay.
so that we can recreate it, because with the verification of experience information, that will change the psychologist video. With the psychological assistant application process and the regulatory changes and statutory changes, that will also change that. So we want to make sure we're not giving any unclear
Right.
and confusing information.
Thanks.
Thank you. And at our October 4th outreach meeting, we also had a special guest, Mr. Dennis Sanchi, with the planning manager from the Department of Consumer Affairs. And Ms. Burns, could you also please give us an update on the friendliness, or what he found, or what he's going to work on the friendliness of our website?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Zanchi is going to be working with the board, first off, to get through our Google Analytics, what people are visiting on our website, how often, and then how, like, we can look at all that data. And then we'll be emailing licensees and stakeholders to survey them on their usage. After that, after collecting all the data, they'll establish some benchmarks for success. And they'll gather groups of no more than 40, and we'll be doing one in the north and one in the south, and having focus groups. So the solid group will be running those stakeholder groups, and we'll kind of get input that way on how to best revamp our website, how to make it more user-friendly, and to focus it on things that would help both licensees and the consumers. And then that'll all be starting in 2017. So right now, we're just in the collecting data stage, and then we'll be notifying the board, of course, once those meetings are scheduled.
And could you refresh my memory, please? Did we have an estimated timeline as to, is that going to be all throughout 2017 and our goal to get this accomplished by the end of the year? Was that it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And an update on the newsletter. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Who's?
Just say it out loud.
Oops. Can we get a pause? And
That's okay.
No worries.
The website update, item 9C.
9D.
9D.
Yes. And I can go ahead and start for you. So we have the top 5 pages, and we always report on the top 5 pages. Obviously, they all deal with how we license people and how people obtain licenses from the board. Part of my looking into how we're doing social media and the website, we'll also probably be revamping how we report to you. The top 5 is useful, but it may not also capture things we want to know over time, so that we get a monthly report of how often people are accessing our newsletter. Even if it's not in the top 5, maybe that's something we want to focus on. And then kind of figuring out what the board and staff would like to see numbers on, so that we're reporting not just what's the top 5, what's the splashy stuff, but also what do we have a vested interest in, what are we worried about, and then tracking that usage over time. Are we getting more on the newsletter? Are we getting more on different items? Are the pages on telehealth or exempt settings being hit up more often? So over time, we'll be changing how we report this to you, but for now, it all looks great. We're getting lots of views, and you can see the over time view on the top 5 pages, and you'll see that as things change, they fall on or fall off or get onto the top 5, and so these numbers reflect how that is. So, any questions?
I guess as a comment, that was my comment. I was going to say, Ms. Burns, was the newsletter, and it's a tie into the next item that we're going to discuss. I just feel like over time, the newsletter is so fantastic now. It would be great to be able to track that over time. And I know that you said solid. Going to item 9E, they'll be doing the presentation, but it would, if we could plant any questions, it might be useful to ask, how user-friendly is that? Mm-hmm. And, in terms of, and excuse my ignorance in terms of technology, but is it a PDF or could it be a different way for people to access it? I think that might be a question useful for Solid to explore with folks.
Absolutely. And just in terms of internally, our staff are still figuring out ways to best use Google Analytics and to track these things. So I don't even think we've maximized our use of that we're going to be trying to do. So definitely still developing all this and trying to make better use of what we have, and then also look at, with Mr. Zanchi, how to make it even better.
I'm going to interject here and just welcome Ms. Akwebudu to the meeting. She's been braving the traffic on the 5 freeway. She deserves a medal.
Thank you. Okay, and now we are going to talk about an update on our newsletter. Ms. Sorick, please.
Included in your meeting materials is the summer newsletter. And our next newsletter will be going out by December 20th, I believe. So we're working on the content right now to get that to publication so we can get it released before the last day of fall. That is the goal. I know we were a couple days shy of end of summer. So that includes my report on the newsletter. I know Ms. Marks wanted to request some feedback on how we have our disciplinary update included in the newsletter.
I believe it was a meeting from perhaps February when we discussed the changes that I had offered for how the disciplinary actions are described, so that instead of listing code sections, they actually gave a brief description of what the conduct may have been as the basis for discipline. And I just wanted to see if the board members had any questions or feedback in how those are now drafted.
I have feedback. I like it. That's my brief feedback. I think it's very helpful when we read it and kind of actually know what it is. And it's a little bit of a narrative, which I also like. If I can just say at this point in time, I also like that about the way we're tracking the legislation and stuff. Same thing, it's really nice that we're kind of explaining what it is and why the board took a position or didn't take a position or whatever. So I really like both of those. And I feel like that really gives the people who read this newsletter much more of a sense of the kinds of things that the board does and maybe humanizes the board a little bit. So I liked it.
Anecdotally, people have mentioned to me that they have looked at this beyond their curiosity about what's going on with the disciplinary proceedings. They find it very informative as to what people are getting disciplined for. I have had this discussion with Ms. Monterubio and with Ms. Sorick. We need to be very careful that the narrative is an accurate reflection of the ultimate judgment.
Right.
And I think, there's some bugs to work out in that department, but we're well on the way to doing that. So, yeah.
I did want to also add that one thing that Dr. Horn brought up at the outreach committee was putting in an explanation for why we take positions on bills, and we will do that in the upcoming legislative session. Sometimes we give a description and we give an opposer support, and it doesn't quite capture the why. So we'll make sure and put a 1 or 2 sentence explanation of why the board took a particular position so that our stakeholders know.
I guess now that Ms. Marks asked the question, I guess the question I would ask back to staff is, did we get any feedback from folks that were identified in the newsletter? Was there any negative feedback or positive feedback? Because I would just say, I would agree with Dr. Horn, this newsletter is fantastic, and I do like the way it's written. But just curiosity, it's a great question in terms of feedback. What is the public saying back to us regarding particularly disciplinary actions, if anything?
We haven't received any feedback from the public, but again, the information here is also on our website. If you just click on the link, you can access this information there as well.
I think I also I'm on the mailing list for the board, and I believe I also get a listing of the accusations that have been filed and all that in another form. I don't know if I guess it's email.
It's an email blast. It goes out approximately the 10th of every month, and yes, that includes accusations that have been filed.
Right.
And that just goes to the psychologist?
Anybody who subscribes,
Oh, I see.
yes, it's on our homepage. It's on the right bottom-hand corner.
Okay. Thank you.
And just so you know, we'll take public comment at the end of this report so that we make sure to capture whatever issues the public has in this regard.
I'd like to say one more thing about the newsletter changes, which I, again, think are great. But I think the implication here is that it does a much better job of the education part. So it's outreach and education, and I think it's more educative about the board process. So that I really like, yeah.
And now moving on to the outreach activity updates. Ms. Sorick?
Including in the meeting materials is an outreach activities update document. This is updated for each committee and board meeting. This has all of the board or DCA approved outreach and any other outreach or requests, current and future, that the board has received. So I'm happy to entertain any questions the board might have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Sorek, could you also provide us with an update on the Access to Mental Health Care in the State of California campaign?
Absolutely. The board voted to engage in a 2-year campaign in February of 2015. This is an Access to Mental Health Care in the State of California campaign. Since the conception of that campaign, we have done several items, 13 that are listed in this update. And the last item, 2 items, were the items on a draft outreach plan that we presented at the Outreach and Education Committee meeting, as well as a presentation from a couple of departments on reimbursement for telehealth services, which was very educational. It's something that definitely ties into our Access to Mental Health Care campaign. And I think the more we can increase the communication and get out the message about what is going on with mental health care in the state of California and the services, not just for consumers, but also for our licensees, I think it's really helpful to be able to facilitate that conversation. So I'm happy to entertain any questions the board might have.
I guess just as a comment, it's great to see it all listed here. We've done a lot.
Great.
Thank you. Ms. Burns, could you please give us an update on the draft and the outreach plan that was discussed?
Absolutely. So our staff, and we want to give a big shout out to Connor Leitzel for all his work on this. The staff and Ms. Sorek and the committee all reviewed the draft outreach plan for high schools, community colleges, and university system at the October 4th meeting. And the committee reviewed the plan and noted that the plan focused on clinical psychology more than the other specialties. And so we worked with Dr. Horn to expand the horizons and include environmental, political, and organizational psychology, so that we're hitting all the specialties within, or trying to hit more of the specialties with our outreach and education. And the committee also had a discussion on expanding it to younger students, including middle school students, and also to second career adults. So after the original plan or pilot goes through, that we would also expand this program to reach other audiences. And let's see. The attached plan includes other specialties within psychology, and it's also a phased implementation. So if you look at the plan, the first part is partnering with schools and colleges, and that includes developing the message about why to become a psychologist, all the different things that psychologists do, how they improve people's lives, organizations, the environment, and discussing areas of growth within the field, pretty much creating the message that we'll be sending out to these students in high school and college, and also talking about the societal benefits as well. And then also doing a pilot to start participating in career days and fairs, and trying to do that within the Sacramento area locally, and then expanding that out once we have a good, solid program of ways that psychologists can access different high schools, how to contact a high school and go into that career fair and promote the field. And so that will help us develop a model for that, and then we can expand it to additional schools and to a different lower level grades, and then also higher. The plan obviously has a few different ideas. This will expand, I'm sure, exponentially once we get started. Different associations that represent schools, community colleges, and the UCs and CSUs. And then the option to also partner with other boards to get out the message on the healing arts, such as Board of Behavioral Sciences and the Medical Board, about why enter the healing arts field, why become a psychologist, doctor, marriage and family therapist, pooling resources and kind of getting out that message what you need to do when you're in high school to succeed, what you can do at your community college in order to enter the field at a later point in time. And then also, of course, partnering with other entities, the California Department of Education for, K through 12, and then also the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities. We also want to create promotional information and videos and pamphlets that people can use at their career fairs, that they can show to their students, handouts that can be sent out to schools. That's all part of the outreach plan, and that'll all be developed along the way. And future expansion, of course, once we get the high school and community colleges off the ground, would be to look at what can we do to advocate for middle schoolers. What do they need to know? Obviously, they're earlier on, but what do they need to focus on as they're in middle school and getting into high school? Do they need to get a certain level of math or English or any of those kind of things to focus on to encourage them to keep that in mind as they're going through their high school career or entering their high school? And then also, of course, second career folks. We have quite a few that enter the psychology field, and how to best reach those people. Obviously, that might be a slightly different message from the 18 to 21-year-olds entering first-time college. These folks have already got their bachelor's. How do we reach them with a different message? So, but obviously, running the same steps, figure out the message, figure out who to talk to, reach out to them, provide the materials, and then go from there. So do you have any questions?
I have a question, actually. Do we ever receive calls like at the board, at the office, where people are having mental health day seminars or things like that, and they're looking for speakers? Do we have like a volunteer panel of psychologists?
I don't know that we do. And I haven't heard from Jason that we get a lot of those kind of requests.
Not to my knowledge, and a lot of our, as you know, we have high hopes and very excited about this plan, and we're also very cognizant that we are still under the executive order for travel restrictions. So we will have to be mindful in leveraging our partnerships. What can we use? Materials and YouTube videos for what can we communicate by email, website, social media. So we may be very creative in how we box this up and send it out. So as much as we can, if there are speaking opportunities at, career fairs or mental health days or things like that, if there's opportunities, we can always put in requests. Anytime we have an outreach request, it just has to go through a process of approval.
Thank you.
I would just like to say on this piece, I think it's very exhaustive. Well done. I'm so pleased that you're just covering all of the bases. So wonderful. Well done.
And I would just like to thank Ms. Akwebudu, because this was really your idea. I think a little over a year ago, you had brought this to the board's attention and said that it was something that we should focus on as part of this campaign. So we'd like to thank you for getting us the start, the inspiration, and making it a priority for staff to put this together. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Akwebudu. Because we've been talking about this for a while, but as you were I think this is a fantastic plan, and I just want to pick up on what Ms. Bernal said, and also what you said, Ms. Burns, as you talked about this, about the one missing piece possibly might be partnering with psychologists or special affinity groups, as we talked about what Connor is doing. Fantastic job, Connor. In terms of identifying groups of people and all the affinity groups, it sounds like that might be a way. You said a volunteer panel.
Right.
I feel like we need to put this in here, and it sounds like, I know the request is to go ahead and approve it. I feel comfortable with that. I do feel like we want to make sure we put that, though, in there so that they know there's a role for them. And I think that their experience would be important, and I think that would also get to the notion of the outreach and education goals we've been talking about. So that's the only piece I think that might be missing, is partnering with psychologists and affinity groups. However you like to wordsmith that one, but that kind of concept I think might be great, and maybe the public might have some thoughts on that as well.
And in clarifying that concept, this is a real opportunity to work with our professional associations Typically, I think most of the people that go to these mental health days to do screenings or evaluations or speak tend to be people that are either found through internship sites or through professional associations. So I am a little hesitant about the idea of a volunteer panel, and maybe we want to agendize that for the future, because we would be having people representing, and I know that wasn't necessarily what you were suggesting, Ms. Jones, but I don't think we necessarily want to institutionalize that within the board, as putting the board's imprimatur on whatever those psychologists do on that particular day. So I think it'd be at odds with our need to regulate.
Can I maybe suggest that, I think part of my vision of this would be that we would create toolkits for psychologists to go and use on their own, maybe not really a volunteer panel kind of a thing, but here are all the materials if you would like to connect with your community and go talk to these students or these college students or these middle school students. Here, we'll provide you with the material, the videos, the pamphlets, and then this, and kind of the guide to how to do this, but it wouldn't be you're going to represent us. It's you're going to talk to your community and be engaged in your community. So I think that's how I thought of it, but
That is already being done at a level at the American Psychological Association. I think CPA is directly involved in that. So I don't think we want to reinvent the wheel. I will also tell you, developing that kind of curriculum is a really incredibly time-intensive process. I'm not sure that that's the best use of our time and resources, but it's certainly something we can explore further with due deference to the professional associations and what they do already.
And Dr. Erickson, Dr. Phillips, I think that what you said also, I just wanted to clarify what I was meaning by affinity groups. I meant professional associations. And so the affinity groups that are throughout the state, that include CPA, for instance, but other folks as well. And I do take strong consideration of what you say about the idea of having staff create curriculum. I just feel like I think it's almost as a part of a campaign to get the word out about the profession, to reach out. So I do think maybe somewhere in between, because developing a curriculum would be super time intensive, and there might be some ways that we do a survey of what's already out there, because the smaller regional associations, affinity groups might be doing some of this on their own that we just don't know about. And so again, back to that connection of the database would be helpful. But I definitely wanted just to clarify it. When I was meaning affinity groups, I meant professional association affinity groups.
Yeah, and can I just say something to back up on what you said? I think we definitely want to outreach and educate folks and talk about the field of psychology, but we are a regulatory body, not a professional association, or even like a lot of times when I was at Davis, we'd get calls to the university a lot of times, just asking, is there a psychologist who can come, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So people have ways that they're grabbing or asking for psychologists to participate. And I think we have to, we don't want to take, we're not a professional guild like CPA, but that working with them. So I just kind of want to, I think we always want to come from just thinking about it from a regulatory perspective. Our education, I think, that we would be doing would be just a little bit different than maybe somebody from a professional association.
I just wanted to say, my sense was not that we were, a curriculum or anything like that was going to be developed, but that you all were going to coalesce and cull information together. That's my understanding. And this information would move forward in terms of the breadth and the depth of the psychological profession. That's my understanding. And that toolkit was going to go so that the outreach people would have something to come from in terms of other groups that are being coordinated in their community as they can outreach. That was my understanding.
And I think I understood it that way as
That's the way I
well. So
understood
we
it.
prepared the toolkit, and
Exactly.
you can go and use it.
Well,
Maybe I just didn't say that correctly.
Yeah,
I heard that.
I think we're on, and I don't know how to describe this, I think we're on ground where we have to be very careful about the distinctions we make. It's certainly appropriate, I think, for the Board of Psychology, in my opinion, to try to encourage people to consider the profession of psychology. I think that's consonant with our primary aim, which is consumer protection, making the consumers best served in the state of California. When I talk about content, I'm talking more about things like a depression, specific topics, which in and of themselves can be controversial within the field and can be approached from a variety of different points of view. And I think those types of things, the topic-based material, the content-based material, if you will, in terms of psychology, I think is really better handled, in my mind, by the professional associations. And they have, particularly I think APA, has the resources. They have psychologists on staff that will develop this curriculum. For us to try to develop a curriculum on a specific content area would really require, I think, either hiring or retaining a psychologist or a psychologist expert to try to create the content. So I want to make sure we're making the distinction between making people aware of the profession.
That's what
And
this is about.
So I'm just trying to make sure that we're all clear on this, as opposed to, National Depression Screening Day, which I don't think we want to be directly involved in.
I think what kind of staff was thinking about was a general awareness about why be interested in the profession and what does the application process look like, what to kind of be prepared for. What are the curriculum requirements we have for application for licensure, general anecdotal information about what are the general costs for education, just informational on a very general sense, because I think we want to segue this into access to mental health care, so we want to encourage people to be interested, which I think other boards, I think medical board had an access to care committee. These are the kinds of things that they worked on. So I think we can frame it in a very appropriate regulatory sense and framework, and something that would connect with what our mission is, and informing individuals about what does our application process look like, what is the time frame, what are the costs for application for licensure, and then other information that we get maybe from the profession. What are the typical salaries if you are, if you take insurance, if you don't take insurance, if you work private practice, if you work in a group setting. Those are the kind of things that maybe we can work with the association. And what I was going to recommend is perhaps we can give you a draft of this informational kit for the board to ratify, because I want to make sure you guys feel comfortable with what we put together and that we are on board with what you would like out of this campaign.
I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you. Last thought on it. As we were moving forward with this, we were looking at many students, particularly in community colleges, tend to major in psychology, and oftentimes they don't know the full range of what that degree can do. Also, there's a book called, and I don't know whether I've mentioned this or not, and this kind of spurred my interest as well. It's called In Defense of a Liberal Arts Education. And oftentimes, we are so tech-focused now that somehow the liberal arts education, like, what are you going to do with that? A lot. And that is where we were going to get the word out to them. So we were on the same. That was our thinking. So thank you very much, and thank you for your report. Well done.
Does that conclude your report?
Well, there's one more piece missing.
We're going to
but at
get
this
public
point,
comment before we conclude this topic. But
right. May I have a motion at this point to accept for the board to adopt the high school and college outreach plan?
I second. Did you move, or do you want a motion?
May I have a motion?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Yes, I move that we accept the outreach plan. Yeah, the draft outreach plan for high schools and colleges.
Ms. Jones, did you want to add in the piece about the working with the professional associations?
Yes. So can I offer a friendly amendment, but does it need a second first?
Second.
Can we make the friendly amendment to say with looking at the partnership with professional organizations and using the same number 1 through 4, so we use the same model? So I think that Dr. Phillips' comment is really important, that we keep in mind what our goal is, but if we use what we were agreeing for partnership with the other entities, if we look at through that, so my friendly amendment is to add partnership with psychological associations to this, looking at the model. However messy that is in the motion.
So partnerships with
I don't know if we got that.
psychological.
Somebody got it.
All right. I've got accept the draft outreach plan with looking at partnering with psychological associations and within the model, the current model.
So well done, Ms. Burns. Wasn't that eloquent?
So is a friendly amendment,
Of course.
okay. I'm trying to think, do we need to have somebody, well,
No, we can go ahead and.
any more discussion?
Yeah.
Is Dr. Horn okay with that? Because she seconded the motion, I guess.
You can call for it.
Any public comment on this particular item, and we will get to more general public comment in a moment.
Yes, Dr. Joe Linder Crow with the California Psychological Association. So I really appreciate your comments about the professional organizations. I was surprised to see that in all of the potential partners and collaborators that the California Psychological Association wasn't there, so I appreciate those of you who raised that. Just to your point, Dr. Phillips, and just to sort of set this in context, many of the things that you're talking about in this plan are, in fact, really in the mission of CPA, for example. And as you said, the American Psychological Association has many efforts already underway. The Public Education Campaign, which is a nationwide campaign to educate the public about the value of psychology, the role of psychologists. There is a program called the Teaching of Psychology in the Secondary School, TOPS, which comes out of the Education Directorate at the American Psychological Association, which for many years, their primary mission is to reach down into high schools and teachers of psychology, particularly at the advanced level, the AP courses in psychology. So there are many, many efforts already underway from the psychological associations, of course, to educate students, the public, about the value of psychology, and particularly students about the value of perhaps looking into psychology as a profession. CPA has 20 regional chapters around the state. We also have 8 specialty divisions that represent specialty areas of psychology. Some of those divisions, including our Division of Neuropsychology, our Division of Education and Training, our IO division, have particular efforts underway to reach down and talk to students. They have done programs and projects in collaboration or in conjunction with our annual convention, where they bring students in to observe and attend the convention or parts of the convention. One of our local chapters in Northern California plans to bring a group of undergraduate students to our Leadership and Advocacy Day, which is our lobby day in the spring. So I applaud the board for looking into this, and I like your list. One of the challenges we always have is to make the distinction for us as the professional organization, to make a distinction between psychology and other mental health professionals, and to describe why psychologists are different and the different kinds of things that they do that other mental health professions don't do. So I like your list, and I might take a few of those things, and thank you for doing all that work. But I would like to really say that we stand ready to be a resource on this. But in my experience, the most effective way to talk to people about psychologists is, as some of you have pointed out, and that's to have psychologists go out and talk about being a psychologist. So even as the CEO of the California Psychological Association, I don't think that I am as effective at talking about what it is to be a psychologist as when I ask my members to go and talk about that. So I would just offer that as a cautionary note. To your point about curricula and the kinds of things that, toolkits and so forth, you're right. Those are very labor intensive. They're very expensive, and at the APA level, at least millions of dollars have been spent on these toolkits that psychologists use in the public education campaign to go out and talk to the public. So I would love to offer CPA as a resource, and I know this board has been a bit reluctant in the past to join into any kind of formal collaborative efforts with the professional organization, and I understand the reasons that have been presented that make that difficult, but we are always ready to be a resource. And even if it's just to let you know what is already taking place around both at the national level and at the state level, because I understand the goal of this, and I think as you clarified it, it made more sense to me as you clarified it as being a way to describe to potential psychologists what it's like to be a psychologist. And it's your decision whether that falls under the mission of the Board of Psychology, as I think Dr. Horn pointed out, as a regulatory agency. So we would be able to provide you with any information that would be helpful to you as we go along. But I think it is important to know that there are many, many efforts at the professional association level. And as Dr. Horn said, I mean, that's our job. We're the guild. We are the ones who are trying to point out the value of psychology and encourage people to go into the field. So I hope we can be of help so that you're not duplicating a lot of efforts that are already underway. And certainly if there comes a time when you do want to get psychologists involved at some level to try and do some of these things, I hope you will reach out to us as probably, you have all the licensees, but we do have access to a lot of people, and I think it would be important, like you said, to include psychologists. And if the board is moving in the direction of kind of moving into these activities, these kinds of activities, then I hope that we would look at ways to partner and collaborate between the regulatory board and the professional organization, if that is something that we find is allowable and doable in the future.
And to your point, as I think about it, I think really our object here is to increase the number of qualified psychologists in order to promote access to health care. So I think your emphasis is probably slightly different. You're trying to promote the profession for the betterment of the people in the profession.
Well, not necessarily. We have a twofold mission. And in fact, our new mission statement is to advocate for the welfare of all Californians, along with, promoting the science and practice of psychology. So at least in CPA's case, the access to care is one of the three tenets of our mission statement, and very much on the minds of what we try to do, and often is one of the strong arguments when we're advocating for pieces of legislation or against pieces of legislation. The access to care issue is really primary for us as well.
I appreciate that clarification. I also appreciate your kind offers to be of assistance in this. And there are times when professional associations and regulatory boards are in conflict. or have a different position based on their respective roles. But this seems to me one of the areas where our objectives can be consonant, and it would be appropriate,
Yeah,
in my
I would agree.
mind, to potentially partner.
I think there are probably more opportunities for partnering than not between the professional, at least in California, I would say our history has been.
And there may also be a complementary, unique role each of us can play in this. I think, given your mission and kind of defining what the profession is and what it means, and us looking at increasing the number of licensees and walking people through the process of what does it mean to become a licensed psychologist. So I think we can each have our unique, appropriate roles in this campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that concludes the agenda items that you had. Now I would like to, or do you have more agenda
We
items?
have one more.
I don't believe there was a vote on the motion.
Oh, the vote on the motion.
No, but
there
we
you
also
go.
have to, we also
I
need
never
to
give you the
cover.
votes of the quorums. Ms. Burns?
Yes. Erickson?
Aye.
Burnell?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones? Aye. Phillips?
Aye.
Do you want me, oh, and the motion passes?
I think the motion passed.
Yeah. I didn't know if you wanted me to say it. so
That's
I wasn't
okay.
sure.
You do have one more agenda.
We have one more. It was a very lively committee discussion. And Ms. Burns, could you please summarize?
Absolutely. So the Outreach and Education Committee had a discussion on the lack of third-party payer reimbursement for telehealth services at the October 4th meeting. That included the participation of the Department of Healthcare Services and the Department of Managed Healthcare. We had Dr. Tyrone Adams and Ms. Raquel Sanchez from DHCS and Ms. Elizabeth Spring, an attorney for the Office of Plan Licensing from the Department of Managed Health. And they both gave a kind of presentation on how telehealth is viewed by both of those agencies and what they're looking at. So for the Department of Healthcare Services, it's how Medi-Cal reimburses for telehealth or doesn't. And there was a very lively discussion on how live, interactive, audio-visual telehealth may not quite be the way all psychologists practice telehealth, and that maybe that's more of a medical view for physicians and reporting out of physical ailments and those kind of interactions because it's very restrictive for Medi-Cal reimbursement. Obviously, having a patient go into a clinic or hospital to receive the telehealth in a location where it can be documented by a nurse or a practitioner, a licensed practitioner of some sort, and you as the psychologist being at your place and also having the live interactive video is not always how it's done when your patient calls in and they're in a crisis situation and they just need to talk to you on the phone. So for Medi-Cal, that's not covered. There obviously was a bill this year that died that dealt with adding telephone calls to telehealth, but currently that's not the status. It was a very lively discussion for the Medi-Cal portion. And then we also got a report from Department of Managed Healthcare about how the field is transitioning within managed care and how there is more telehealth services for Magellan, Blue Cross, and HealthNet that offer telehealth reimbursement services, and that they are using different services to provide those, including Live Health Online, which is Blue Cross, and then MD Live, which is HealthNet, so that if psychologists were wanting to get reimbursed, they could go through these services. Essentially, they would get paid by MD Live or
I think
by
they'd be part of their panel.
yeah.
Right.
So and that would be different. So you wouldn't actually be you wouldn't be paid by Blue Cross. You'd be paid by this other company. So that's one way to get into doing telehealth with managed health. Obviously, each contract is different. That was kind of managed health's conversation, is that they're not looking about how you're getting reimbursed, what the rates are. They're just making sure that it's there and in the contract. So that's not exactly their focus. So I think a lot of what we learned that day was that how the managed health and how DHCS are looking at telehealth is not exactly how we view telehealth. And that maybe some of our efforts in the future should be on increasing that awareness and advocating for something more that psychologists would benefit from.
And I think the criteria specifically for Medicaid was that the location needed, where you're performing telehealth, needed to be a designated site, an approved designated site. So that was why a hospital environment was. So again, point being, it was a very lively conversation, and I believe we will continue to have further conversations related to that.
Absolutely.
May I ask a question? It seems like the takeaway is that if a person is a Medi-Cal patient, there's almost no possibility for reimbursement to a psychologist. And if you're dealing with someone through an HMO, you might have some reimbursement, but it may not be on parity with in-office rates. Am I hearing that correctly?
But this is specific for telehealth.
Yeah. And
Yes, of course.
Yes.
But it did sound like it would have parity with your the reimbursement sounded like it would have parity with your in-office visit, but that doesn't mean it would be at the rate you might want it. And I believe there's not much in there to talk about rates of marriage and family therapists versus psychologists. I don't know that you'd be getting the reimbursement rate you were looking for. But
Well, I
it
think
also
that
was-
really, though, the main issue was that psychologists, right, felt that they were getting, their bills were not being paid when they were submitted, and they were under telehealth visits. So that was, I think, what really even started this conversation, where we invited the guests to educate us to turn around and educate others.
Yes.
Correct?
Right.
Absolutely. And that there's special codes for telehealth. However, when you look at what's required for it to be considered telehealth by those companies, that may not fit within your definition, is the problem.
It was very restrictive,
Extreme.
as Ms. Bernal said. It's really with a medical model.
Yeah.
And pretty much not at all the kind of, even in terms of emergency situations, the kind of emergency situation a psychologist would experience versus a medical doctor.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very much that way. Yeah.
To add a little more, if I may, many of the HMOs have a contracted rate for providers that's less than your normal rate. And further, the telehealth rate through the HMO may be less than the contracted rate, which is unfortunate. And looking here, it looks like there's 23 states that do require parity, and I think we don't have that in California yet. So that's something we may want to look at.
And that was mentioned actually by the attorney from the Department of Managed Health, that if it was required by law, that the Department of Managed Health would be looking for it in their contracts. And I think that was a very good point, is that the legislature holds the purse strings and the policy for Medi-Cal, for Department of Healthcare Services, and it also dictates what the Department of Managed Healthcare will look at in those contracts. So if it's required by law, DMHC will enforce it. So they'll be looking for it in the contracts. They'll be sure that the provider contracts match. So that's definitely something we can look into in our advocacy efforts.
Another thing that I might just quickly add is that a resource in terms of reimbursement is the Center for Connected Health Policy. I'm not sure if people are aware of that. They have a website, cchpca.org. I found it quite useful to look through their website, and they have reimbursement policies for telehealth for each of the 50 states listed. So it's not the final answer to anything, but it may be helpful as this evolves in our discussion, and we can get into this more when we talk about telehealth, perhaps.
And just to bring the focus of this conversation a bit back to our mission statement, part of the reason that we're concerned about this particular issue is because we need to be able to provide access to care. And if it's not available within this context, particularly in some of our more rural counties, where there's maybe one psychologist in the entire county, or none, we want to be able to provide that service. And also, we want to be able to provide continuity of care when people are in emergency situations and need to be able to speak to their psychologist as part of their treatment. They kind of disincentivize that by not paying the psychologist for it. So Obviously, this is something I think that really is consonant with our mission statement.
Thanks for that clarification, because that's exactly right. I mean, this is where it's really needed. It's in those rural areas or underserved, with underserved groups or in underserved areas, and so.
And I think one of the things that we heard quite a bit ago was anecdotally, I had heard from a handful of licensed psychologists that they were having trouble getting reimbursed for telehealth services. One of the things we did on our website was include the link to the agency that processes complaints for lack of reimbursement if there was a contested denial. I wanted to make sure that we are a resource to provide, especially state agency information on what is your recourse as a licensee, and what are the agencies out there that are here to support you. So we did get that anecdotal information about, lack of reimbursement, and then it really segued into access to mental health care. And it was a very enlightening conversation, I think, that we had at the committee meeting.
Yeah.
So I was really grateful that the departments were there to present, and we did, what was the action that we took about at least posting the information? We're going to be including an article about that in our winter journal to provide the resources on what the codes are, the reimbursement rates, and then the information on the two agencies and their respective roles in both Medi-Cal and, on the HMO side.
I mean, just on that, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, though, if we would necessarily include the codes, would we? Because that might be getting into just some waters that I'm not sure if that's our place.
We would want to be careful in including CPT codes because those are actually copyrighted by. So I think we'd need to check and see if that was appropriate for us to give the CPT codes.
And right now, the plan was to include things that are publicly available on DHCS's website.
Okay.
This is a manual that they put on their website, and then there is also a resource created by a telehealth network, and they also have a book. There's a policy booklet. It's online, and it's available to the public. So
Great.
not publishing anything that isn't currently already out there in the world. So.
Great. Thank you.
And maybe we could look at Dr. Erickson's link here. I mean, that might be helpful as well. Thank you. And that does summarize. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, right. Sorry. One more. Oh, Dr. Horn, could you please provide us with an update on the last item here as it relates to, oh, no, I'm sorry, Ms. Sorik.
No
I
problem.
apologize.
At the August meeting, Dr. Horn talked about the presentation that was given about the use of social media that was covered in the annual meeting for ASPBB, and it was very informational and enlightening. One of the things that the board considered in consultation with legal counsel was how could we address this issue by perhaps preparing a guideline or whatnot. And the thing that we really want to be careful about is not putting out kind of an underground regulation or something that if someone did not follow the guidelines, they would somehow be disciplined by the board. So in light of that caution, we are looking at leveraging partnerships with stakeholders, and I have reached out to the American Psychological Association about reprinting, with their permission, one of their continuing education articles about this issue, and it was a really informative article. So we're hoping to have that included in our fall journal. So that is the action that we took as the next step on this.
Thank you. Did you have a question? No? Okay.
As I promised, we're going to have now public comment on the entirety of this report. Come on down.
Dr. Joe Lindercrow, California Psychological Association. This is really a question for clarification. And that is, I'm interested in knowing what the policy of the board is about distributing information about actions either taken against psychologists or the example that that brought this to my mind was that recently I saw on your Facebook page a posting that a psychologist had been arrested, and that was posted on the Board of Psychology website, Facebook page. So it made me wonder about the policy for when and how and how you post things, when you post things, because as I recall, it didn't say that there had been action taken by the board, but that this person had been arrested, but not convicted, I don't think. And so it just struck me as I wondered if it was necessary to publicize that kind of thing through social media. I understand, and I'm assuming that you are required to post disciplinary actions on your website. That's been my understanding. Is that right? On the website, so that the public has access to that. But I began to wonder: is it required that you put disciplinary actions in the newsletter? And then this particular thing made me wonder: is it required, and how do you decide when to put those things on Twitter or Facebook? So I'm just asking as clarification.
And perhaps Ms. Monterrubio would like to come forward so that you can talk about the specifics of this with Ms. Sorek.
I'll just start it out, and then I'll tag team with Ms. Monterrubio on this. Typically, boards that have issues of if there's a pressing consumer protection issue and there has been an article in the print media, it is incumbent, I think, on boards and bureaus to show that they are on top of consumer protection. Oftentimes, there are press releases that will go out from boards and bureaus showing that the board is either taking some kind of action or investigating the matter. We would never say something that was libelous or defamatory. We always take caution, but we want to let the public know to verify the license of their licensees that they're going to be getting services from, and if there is something, as I said, that has gone out in the local media, we want to show that we are at least looking into the matter, and then I'll let you kind of take over from there.
And that's exactly right. We are required to post disciplinary actions on our website, and that is what we do. Depending on the circumstances surrounding the arrest, we may post that information through a news release, a press release on Facebook. We have had a few cases where there's only been an arrest and not a conviction. One had to deal with Medi-Cal fraud. So we work with the AG's office, we work with our investigative unit to determine what is going to be released. We also work with our public affairs office as well, who actually prepares these releases, this information for us. We approve it through our legal counsel, and then it gets posted. But it really just depends on what the arrest was for and whether or not, as Ms. Sorek stated, we need to get the word out and not wait for an accusation and a stipulated settlement or a proposed decision to be issued. We want consumers to know now.
And if I'm correct, I don't want to. There was a case that was in the media, so I'm assuming this was the case that was on Facebook. I have to confess, I do not have Facebook, and I'm happy to say that.
Neither do I.
But this case in particular, I think, involves someone that was a provider to children. Is that the case? Who had been consuming or had been accused of having child pornography. So I think this is the kind of case in particular where we want to let consumers know that questions have been raised, not necessarily that it's been adjudicated or not necessarily that the person that an accusation is going to be filed, but I do think it comes within the area of letting consumers know what's going on with the profession that might be directly relevant to the consumption of psychological services.
I appreciate the explanation. I think what strikes me is that it brings us into this world of social media. And while in the past, I know that there have been press releases that have been issued from the board or DCA, I think we're all in this world of now we have access to all this social media that can be forwarded around and retweeted and reposted and liked or not liked or commented on, I think it would be good if we're all careful. And if you think that it's necessary, and I think what I'm hearing is that the social media like Facebook and Twitter is viewed as just an extension of a press release. And I think that is something to consider, whether or not whether it's all the same thing. And maybe it is for this purpose. It certainly allows for wide distribution of information. My fear is it also allows for a lot of misinterpretation sometimes. So I appreciate the information. I was really just struck by seeing that and surprised, especially since it was not. It was an arrest, not a conviction, and I guess from my perspective, in my job, I would view that as a risk management issue, posting something like that. But I know that the way that I would view that for our association is perhaps not the same as a consumer protection role that you feel you have.
And I think this is a relative. We obviously don't do this every time we become aware of somebody's having criminal charges brought against them. But we thought the seriousness of the situation warranted looking at whether we should do this or not. And in conjunction with all these other agencies, we made a determination it would be.
And just to clarify, we take action upon a conviction, but first and foremost, we are a consumer protection agency. And so we do need to get the word out, and not everyone does go to our website and look at our news releases. So this, again, is just an extension for those that may not go to our website. But again, we are a consumer protection agency.
I have a comment. Dr. Linda Crow, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I think it's a complex and evolving issue, and it raises a lot of questions in my mind as I think about it. For example, early on with Facebook and Twitter, it wasn't clear who had the authority to post things on those pages. And so I think we've developed a policy regarding that. I didn't see this actual posting, but I have similar questions around risk management, like those that you have mentioned. And I'm not sure that we're going to decide anything today, but I'm wondering if it might help if we made clear where the information in the press release came from. For example, if we listed DCA as the source of the press release on our Facebook page, it might make it clearer to the reader that we didn't decide. Yeah.
Actually, it links to our website. And so I would say, I had the first thought the same with you. I also am on Facebook, Dr. Erickson, and I actually, when I read the post, and I'll share it with you, I feel more comfortable because we aren't taking we're not making a statement.
Good.
We're basically just stating a fact, and then it's the link to our website, because basically we did issue a press release, and that's really all it links back to. But I initially had missed this post, I have too many fronts, but but I do think that gives me. Thank you for the explanation, Ms. Monterrubio and Ms. Zurich, because I would have had my same gut reaction. I'll share it with you.
Great, good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Linda Crow. Does that conclude your report?
It
That's nice.
does, and now I'd like to ask if we can move this into motion for the board to accept the outreach and education report.
Second.
Any discussion by the board members? Any public discussion? Ms. Burns, would you call the vote?
I just want to clarify, I don't, I think that.
No,
the
I asked if
appropriate-
I may move it into motion. Is that?
Right, I just want to be clear. I think the only action item, the board already voted, so I think accepting the report is appropriate, right? Because I don't think there are any need to approve any recommendations. I think the one that had.
I think you're right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Marks. It is accepted. No.
I think it's a bad idea.
You think we should? Okay, is that what the motion was? So it's to
Yes.
accept the report?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any board comment? Any public comment? Thank you for your patience, Ms. Burns.
McCoy Badoo? Erickson?
Aye.
Bernal?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Passes.
We're now going to take about a 10-minute break. We're going to come back, actually, and discuss agenda item number 10. So people are ready to do that. That was going to originally schedule for after lunch, but I think since we've got lots of time left before it even hits noon, we should at least deal with that agenda item before we break for lunch.
Also, I believe we were going to cover agenda item number 5, correct, as we didn't have this?
Yeah, after we read them.
Okay, got it, thank you.
So we're going to return to session now, and we're going to take up agenda item number 10. As I mentioned before the break, agenda item number 5, which is the minutes of the last full quarterly board meeting, will be discussed after lunch. So if people need time to review those notes, please try to avail yourself of the lunch hour to do that. Agenda item number 10 was brought to our attention by Ms. Jones. Do you want to set any kind of context for this first, or?
I'll just mention what's in the memo and then defer to Ms. Jones, if I may. At the August board meeting, Ms. Nicole Jones requested the board discuss the use of subcommittees, and by subcommittees, I mean 2-member committees. These are ad hoc committees that are created to address issues of the board for review by the full board after meeting and recommendations are moved forward. Included in the meeting materials are a list of the current subcommittees the board has, a veto message of AB 2058 Wilk regarding the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, a letter of opposition to AB 85 Wilk, which also addressed the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, the veto message on AB 85 Wilk regarding the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, and lastly, the survey of other DCA boards which use 2-member committees and whether or not they post their notices and agendas for 2-member committees.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips and Ms. Sorek. I feel like in terms of, I feel like this, thank you so much for pulling all the material together for staff, because I know that the request was made. I do think that everything that's listed here is accurate in terms of what came up. The thing that is missing, I think, is some of the context. This is, my request came as a result of a conversation about the telehealth committee and the fact that it was 2 people. And it really was in regards to the fact that when some of the discussion came as to, in response to questions that we had about it, the question was for expediency's sake, we wanted to do it as a 2-member board. And I just feel like in terms of our board vision and our board mission, which we developed in the strategic plan, transparency is one of our main key goals, or values, I should say. And so I felt like, I think that it would just be a good idea for us to talk about it. So again, all of this is correct, but I just wanted to add that context because it was in response to the notion of, and I think that as we continue to have the discussion, I think it was stated that maybe that was the wrong word choice initially made, but I think that was my initial thought, was the fact that if we're going to do this strategy for expediency, we miss out on the public comment, in particular the telehealth issue, given the fact that since I've been a member of the board, that was an issue that had been discussed on many occasions in several committees. And so, and the fact that we were using other documents to guide us, it felt like we needed to have the public involvement. So I guess while we're not talking about that, that's not the issue on the board agenda today. I just feel like it would be helpful for us just to realize when we do a two-member committee that there is not a consequence, but there is a trade-off that we're doing. And I think that I thought it was really helpful just to start off the conversation, the fact that there are some two-member committees that are operating in DCA that still notice agenda, so that does give people an opportunity to come. So I guess I have no other agenda than to say that I just thought it would be great for us to discuss that and to come to some agreement as a group when we do that and when we don't do that, or maybe we revisit it every time we establish a committee. So, Dr. Phillips, that would be my kind of contextual comments.
Okay.
I just wanted to, may I just say, it seems as though we can do either or.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, go ahead. I just wanted to say that, and also to see if we wanted to somehow put that into when we have, or if we have a two-member committee.
It might be
codify that into our board. That's right.
Well, I think what Ms. Jones is suggesting is that when we establish a two-person committee, when there is a task special committee appointed, that we should consider whether it should be something that's going to be, their meetings are going to be publicly noticed or not. I do want to comment that all the information that comes out of these committees is then brought to the board, and that there's an opportunity for public comment at that point. I think as it relates to the telepsychology committee, using it as an example, we did become aware at the board meeting last time that there were some valuable information coming to us from, I wouldn't say members of the public, but from stakeholder groups, that we took that information into account. We then went back and had another committee meeting, which we did let people know about, including not only CPA, but ASPPV. I don't know who else we notified relative to that committee meeting. We did get good feedback, and we're going to be bringing that information to this board meeting. So I do think that these things are still available for public comment. I think I'm the one that used the word expediency last time, but I think what we're really talking about is having the flexibility to be able to have two-member committees. I think if we were to kind of create some kind of policy where every two-member committee meeting had to be noticed, we might unintentionally be creating problems for ourselves, and that some business, for purposes of flexibility, as the governor pointed out in his veto message, is better addressed in two-member committees. I think we'd also get into a problem if we did notice for all of those things. Are we adopting a policy that any times two board members speak to each other, that should be noticed, which I think really would hamstring us as a board. So that's one of my concerns relative to that.
Can I just add one more thing, though, too, because when you made that comment, the part I did fail to bring to also, I think that I would agree with you that in the past when we did the Sunset Review Committee, I feel like then you and then President Dr. Erickson did tell us that that was the case. And so I think I just didn't feel informed that we were doing that. And I felt like the other issue that I think that came up too with that one is that we did say public could have an opinion, but it was all a hand carry, so no one had time to even review it. So I do think that that is something that I agree with you, and I just wanted to state that part because I think that was not my intention to say we shouldn't be flexible. I do think that we do need to just always keep in mind our notion of transparency, however, in terms of doing it, because in certain issues, we've been dealing with them for multiple years, so expediency hasn't really been taken as the highest value necessarily on certain things because we wanted to get it right. And so I just feel like that public comment helps us get it right easier. So.
And you know, in retrospect, we might have noticed the telepsychology committee meeting, so we had more stakeholder input from the beginning. I think it would be more difficult with some of the other committees. just because of the detail that we go into and the staff feedback we get in the context of the committee meetings. So, but I think it's an important thing to kind of put a bookmark in when we go to a two-person committee. Is this a committee that should be? I don't know that it requires a formal adoption of policy. I think it requires a consciousness on our part as board members and a consciousness on staff's part that that's one of the issues we should visit when we're trying to do this, and then make a policy decision as to what's appropriate in that circumstance.
I agree with everything that's being said, and I would add a couple of things that I don't think there's been, that I'm aware of anyway, any attempt to exclude public input, which would be wrong. Rather, it's working forward as a two-person committee. In the case of telehealth, we've had a telephone consultation with stakeholder CPA, separate from the committee meeting to get input. But finally, I think, since I'm sitting on one of the two-person committees, I believe it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I have public input somewhere along the way before I make a presentation to the board for consideration, and that I would expect the board to ask, well, did you get public input on this? And I don't want to be in the position of saying, well, no, I didn't think of that. It's very important, I think.
And I just want to emphasize, I don't think, you can speak for yourself, Ms. Jones, I don't want to intimate, I do think that this board is very open to public comment. I think we've become aware of the importance of it more and more over the last several years. And I don't think there's any attempt to hide the ball here. I don't think anybody's trying to pull a fast one or that there's subterfuge involved. We're just not that nefarious.
So if I'm hearing y'all, and I absolutely agree that whenever we appoint a two-person committee or whenever a two-person committee is appointed, that our first question or one of our first questions would be, is this something we think would be better to have it to be noticed so that we get public comment right off the bat or public input right off the bat? Or is this something that could be a two-person committee? It'll be brought back to the board and then we'll get public comment. So it's kind of when in the process it sounds like that we...
And I would say I agree with what you said. As you said, I could speak for myself. But I do think that you captured what I was saying. And I don't think that we at all were being nefarious and hiding. But I think we have to keep in mind what perception feels like also. Because there were several people in the public audience that day that were like shocked and they hadn't seen the hand carry yet. And I just feel like we have gone to great lengths to ensure that we do that. And you said it's incumbent upon you to get public opinion. Well, if it's not posted, then you're going to only certain people to get that comment. So we've got to just ensure that we keep that perception that we are open to hear, I think. And I think, again, I think the Sunset Review is an excellent example. I think when Ms. Zorek came to us and talked about it and explained the process, we explained it would be a two-person to move quickly. Expediency in that case made a lot of sense. So I think we should think about that. But also, as a board member, I think I was shocked. I assumed it had been posted. So I think that as we decide on what we do with the two-person committee, we should maybe communicate that out, like we did for Sunset Review, to at least the board members, but also I think the public should be made aware also. And I think that's also was my reaction to the fact that I made the assumption that we had gotten public comment on that. So I think that I'm in agreement with all that's being said, and I don't think that anyone here of our colleagues are nefarious in any way. And I think that we definitely welcome that kind of opinion. So I just wanted to make sure that we just keep it top of mind and that we keep in mind about perception.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, our Sunset report was definitely, I think we had 2 board meetings where it was open to the public, so I just want to clarify that that was available to the public. We did post it on our website, and that was a public process. We had it posted or projected during, I know we were finalizing the agenda the day after Thanksgiving, so the timing might not have been conducive to participation by the public, but we were on a tight turnaround. So certainly the effort was to be very transparent about our sunset review process, so I just wanted to clarify that.
But Ms. Sorek, that meeting after Thanksgiving was actually a full board meeting. That wasn't the committee meeting. So I don't know if there were any committee meetings between the two. Dr. Horn, you were on that committee, correct? And was it Dr. Erickson or Dr. Phillips? So, yes, so I don't know if they have, we might have had some meetings, but we definitely wanted to bring everything back. But I just, again, when you explained that to me, it made a lot of sense. But I'm glad that we did have a full board meeting dedicated solely to the report out of the Sunset Review Committee.
Any further comments from the board? Any public comments? Okay. Well, that's agenda item number 10. Conceivably, at this point, we have various disciplinary matters coming up, some of which will be discussed entirely in closed session. So I'm going to suggest, to make best use of our time, that we speak about one of those matters. So we're going to go into closed session now. We have to be back here by 1:30. So for any of the members of the public that will be leaving the room or staff, there's a hearing at 1:30, so it has to start at 1:30. We're breaking for we're gonna break after the closed session, but there'll be no further discussion of anything that would be available. And then at 1:30 we'll resume with the hearing. In open session, correct. Okay. So thank you very much. We're now going into closed session.
Is this the one we're discussing?
Oh, I'm glad we could talk about it. I wasn't sure.
Oh, which one is it? This one?
So I'm assuming he hasn't said, but I'm.
Okay, we're on the record. Records reflect that it's November 17, 2016. We're convened in San Diego, California. My name is James Ayler. I'm an administrative law judge, and I have been assigned to preside over the petition for reinstatement of the revoked license of Charles Stockton, Ph.D. This matter is before the California Board of Psychology. May I request that each board member introduce himself or herself, beginning here to my far right.
Good afternoon. I'm Lucilla Quavidu.
Hello, Michael Erickson.
Good afternoon, Nicole Jones.
Stephen Phillips.
Jackie Horn.
Alita Bernal.
Thank you. And this constitutes a quorum of the board. May I have the appearances on behalf of the petitioner, please? Your name, sir? Charles Stockton. And are you here representing yourself? Yes. Very well. If you have any question as the proceeding goes along, stop and let us know. The point of this is not to do anything other than to let you have a full and complete and fair hearing in this matter, okay? Thank you so much. And who's representing the Office of the Attorney General today?
Giovanni Mejia for the Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you. It's customary in these matters to have the Attorney General's office provide us with a statement concerning the background. Can you tell us what's going on and brings us all together?
Yes, Your Honor. Would it be possible to admit the exhibits before that?
Is that how you'd like to proceed?
Yes, I would.
Sure.
If that's fine with you.
Sure.
Okay. So I would first like to, what's been marked as Exhibit 1, which is a jurisdictional document, which is the petition for reinstatement as submitted by petitioner.
Any objection?
No.
Received.
I'd like to submit another jurisdictional document, Exhibit 2. This is the notice of hearing that was provided to petitioner.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Received.
Would like to submit Exhibit 3, which is the certificate of Mr. Stockton's licensure history.
Any objection? It tells us when you were licensed and what happened.
Oh, this is right.
Exhibit 3.
3, yeah, okay, yes, sir. It's okay.
It'll be received.
I would like to submit what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 4, which is the certified judgment denying the petition for a writ of administrative mandamus, the order directing issuance of an alternative writ of mandamus, and a decision and order and accusation for the case underlying the revocation of Mr. Stockton's license.
These are jurisdictional documents as well,
Yes,
and offered to establish res judicata.
yes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Be received.
I'd like to submit Exhibit 5, which is a transcript of a interview with petitioner on July 11th, 2016 by an investigator of the Health Quality Investigation Unit.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Be received.
I'd like to submit Exhibit 6, which were additional supplementary documents submitted by petitioner following that interview.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Exhibit 6 will be received.
And I would like to submit Exhibit 7, which was the investigation report of the Department of Investigation.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It will be received as well. The respondent has also provided us with a document. It's called a petition for reinstatement of psychology license. And at the front of that is a table of contents. Do you have any objection to the board receiving this document?
No, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's
you're
addressing me in this
okay.
instance.
Do you,
yes.
sir? Mr. Mejia?
I do, Your Honor.
Objections overruled. It'll be received.
Okay.
Thank you. This matter, Mr. Stockton has the burden of proof, and the board is advised that the amount of proof that he's required to provide in this proceeding is clear and convincing evidence. So with that, are you ready to proceed?
You want me to, yeah. my
Yeah,
statement? Yes.
you get to go first.
Good. Okay.
And if you're more comfortable being seated, you can remain seated. If you're more comfortable standing, stand.
I think I'd be more comfortable seated.
Very well.
Your Honor. Okay. In the documents that I sent to you, or I gave to you, I have some statements in there about myself and about what has happened to me and so forth. I believe that when my license was, first hearing it, my license was not, I was not properly represented. I had an attorney, which was a criminal attorney. It didn't ask the right questions. He did not provide character witnesses for me, and he did not really review the documents of what I was brought before him. This proceeding happened 5 years after the alleged incident. And the case settled. This patient sued me back in 1993 for $250,000. And with the help of her attorney, he had written up her statements and everything. And the money was paid to her, and this was paid by my insurance company, and I didn't have an insurance company after that, a liability insurance company. So when the board brought their action against me, I thought it was unfair because I had no liability insurance to pay for my legal fees. The case was settled, and the patient had signed in the settlement of the case that she signed that she was completely satisfied, and she would not say anything more about it or raise any complaint. But evidently, she said something to a psychologist she was seeing or something, and that was reported to the board. So that was one thing I felt was unfair about the first hearing, that I no longer had liability insurance. And I did not have money to legally get the representation that I needed. And when the key witnesses for me were not available, this might bring in the, if attorney was argument, might bring in latches. That is, the minister that was referred to in this case had died 2 years before this. My church secretary, which was really important for me to be able to question and clarify some facts, was no longer available. She'd moved. I had no way of contacting her. During this time, this lawsuit was first brought against me in 1993, I believe it was. I did a lot of work, and I think it's in what I handed you, a lot of the courses that I took. It's in Appendix A. During this time, I took tests, was qualified to be a diplomat in forensic psychology, and I also was able to become a state of California medical examiner for workers' compensation cases. Those are all tests that I had to take and studies and hours that I had to get in to do that. This was all completed before Board of Psychology brought their case against me. Fact is, I had practiced 30 years as a marriage and family counselor, 20 years as a clinical psychologist, and there were no complaints brought before this or after this. Another thing that is really important, I think, is when the board brought their case against me, there was no consideration that this was approximately 5 years after the alleged incident, and it did not take into consideration that there was no complaints made against me in that 5 years. And I was seeing patients that were, I think some of these patients were even harmed by me, by the board taking my license away. They were depending on me, and many of them would have written letters to the board stating how I'd helped them and so forth. The patient, I had a couple of my patients wrote a couple of letters. I don't know what happened to them. They were sent to the board back in 1995 or 6 or 7. I can't remember now. But they were sent along with that package when it was sent to the board with my other letters. But a couple of patients that I had, one patient was a person who was severely depressed. I helped him work through his depression. He attributed me to saving his life. Another patient had post-traumatic stress syndrome. He was a Vietnam veteran, had a lot of issues that he had to deal with, and he also wrote a letter on my behalf stating how much I'd helped him, and he wanted me to continue to be his therapist, which after my license was revoked, I had stated I could not do that. I had other patients that I told them what had happened, and they were very disturbed and wanted to know if they could do anything. And I said, well, there's not anything much you can do now. But I think some of them probably were hurt by the fact that the board took my license away. Now, the hearing that I had was a hearing which I believe it was the attorney that represented the board, who was a very good attorney, a lot better than mine. I already had this figured out here, and circumstantial evidence that he had, and there was circumstantial evidence that could incriminate me as doing something wrong. But I felt that there was not an opportunity for me really to get my case before the board in the way that we wanted. My attorney at the board hearing, he didn't ask many questions, so forth, the first week, and he had subpoenaed he subpoenaed the patient who was bringing the complaint back to the court so we could cross-examine her and get into her testimony a little bit more, and the hearing judge would not allow us to do that. He stated that my attorney had not stated something to him. I don't know, I didn't understand it, but he stated that my attorney had not told him that he was going to do that or something, and he would not allow it. And so we did not get to cross-examine her. After I went back to the board a year later and requested my license to be reinstated. It was not done. And so at that time, we had taken it to the Superior Court, but they didn't even look at the transcript of the trial or anything. So I decided I would take it to the Supreme Court of California. I spent a considerable amount of time in the law library looking up case histories and so forth, and I prepared a brief. I don't have it here in this, but I have a kind of a summary of it. A brief about what was really, I felt, was an injustice to me. I took it to the Supreme Court. We missed the calendar, and they said I can get on the next calendar, and they suggested that I get an attorney, that they'd think I'd do much better if I had an attorney, and that's probably true. But that happened in, I think, in the end of 2001. I think I was going to do that. But at that time, I was diagnosed with having prostate cancer, which I had to do something about. And so, beginning of 2002, I had a procedure where they plant radioactive seeds in the prostate. And that radioactive seeds that they placed in it caused me to be depressed. I was depressed for about a year. And so I didn't do anything. I just kind of dropped that, and I went into selling real estate because I have a broker's license in real estate. So after I stayed in there, what happened after that, I went to, in 2010, I moved to Virginia, Lynchburg, Virginia, and I started teaching at Central Virginia Community College, psychology, and I have those courses listed in the exhibit that I gave you. I moved out there to help my wife take care of her son, who was totally disabled, and he needed her help. So one of the reasons I'd like to get my license reinstated is I have a couple of books I want to publish, hopefully, and I plan on moving back to California. If my stepson dies, I don't know, he's pretty serious. At this present time, don't know how much longer he has to live. So, what I presented to the board, what I presented in my brief that I was going to present to Superior Court or the Supreme Court, was that there were several issues in there that I thought were very significant, that I found in doing research in the law library. And that's on page 20. First point, the decision of the administrating hearing was not supported by the findings. And I have...
Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would like to object insofar as I don't think any legal argumentation is regarding that initial hearing. It's not relevant to today's hearing. The question today is whether petitioner has submitted sufficient evidence of rehabilitation.
Well, I'm going to let him testify about it, and I'll tell you why. There's two reasons. First, shows the extent to which he believes he committed any wrongdoing and is a measure of remorse. And secondly, this is his opportunity to have a day in court, and he's complaining now that he wasn't given due process 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and he's going to get it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can I continue?
Sure.
Well, the first point I want to make, that the decision of the administrating hearing was not supported by the findings, and I have some things that are listed there. Substantial evidence was consisted where inferences were made, but they were not a product of logic and reason. So the appellant, that's the opening brief on the findings of facts, that the administrative judge's decision were not supported by testimony or adequate foundation that was not given to support those facts. So the expert witness, and my attorney said, I said, well, aren't we going to get an expert witness for me? And he said, no, you don't need one, we'll just use theirs. Well, that was a mistake, because she was, Dr. Sorka admitted that she did not independently evaluate the appellant's records to see if it were true or not. She only assumed that DR was telling truth, and she admitted conflict in the testimony of DR, but it's not up to her to determine if allegations were true. And she also stated that she was to evaluate me as if I were guilty.
To counsel's point, are you asking this board to rewrite the decision below?
No, I'm just asking that this was, I'm asking the board that this I thought was unfair.
Okay.
And it
Go
gives
ahead.
the board an ability to have justice and to be just and fair with me and to reinstate my license, because in the first place, I was not a danger to anyone. So that's the next, one of the next things that I point out in here is that to take your license away, you have to, I think, be proven that you're a danger to the people. And this was really not substantiated. The Administrative Hearing Board is not to take a license away as a punishment. The law certainly states that. But it's because that they might feel that the people might be harmed by it. And my statement is that I had rehabilitated myself, after the court in 1997 asked me, or when we went before, they asked me if what I'd done to be rehabilitated. Well, look what I'd done in the 6 years between that time when the incident was supposed to happen to that point, and I had done a lot to rehabilitate myself. So those points that I made here is that there was error in judgment of the law. I thought was an abuse of to me, and that I point those out in here. We don't need to go point by point here, but they're pointed out here, the fifth point. And the penalty cannot be overturned when the testimony does not support the allegations made against the appellant. But I stated that the appellant court has a right to control the amount of penalty imposed. And even when a doctor's care is below standard of care, a single instant of neglect treatment is not grounds for discipline. That's Grumas versus Medical Board, 1992, and California Appeals 4, page 989. So I point all of this out, and my point that I make that the court is required to consider evidence to make its own independent finding. So I know we're not here to retry the case, but I'm saying there was enough things that were stated that I believe were wrong, and if it were taken to higher court with a good attorney, it would have been overturned. So I hope that you'll read that with open mind and so forth. So I believe within the last, pardon me, turn my phone off here. I believe within the last, since 2000, last 16 years, I've demonstrated a lot of good points in the fact that I taught 5 years for DeVry University in Long Beach. I taught psychology, ethics, and at the Coastline Community College. I've taught there now for about 5 years. And I've been teaching there psychology of criminal conduct or behavior, introduction to psychology, lifespan, developmental psychology, and human relations. And I think what I did at those two, at the university and the college, certainly indicates that I have good character, and there were no complaints ever made or filed against me. I did sell some real estate. There never was a complaint made against me as a real estate agent. I wouldn't know what I did. And therefore, I feel that I should have my license restated. I don't have a lot of years left. I'm 84 years old. Good health, pretty good health right now. I expect to live quite a few more years, but I know that I'm kind of limited. You don't go on living forever or continue to have good health forever. So it is my hope that you will take careful considerations, my complaints and my suggestions in there. I felt that I was unfairly mistreated, but that would have to be decided by a competent court, I guess. So I was willing to hire an attorney to take it to the California Supreme Court because I thought there was enough evidence there to support it. So I know that we don't want to retry the case particularly, but want to look at me, and I think if you look at me and look at what I've done in the last 25, 30 years, you can figure that I have not harmed anyone, even though this lady stated I harmed her. But she was wanting a tremendous amount of money, which she got, which my attorneys for the liability insurances stated it was best just to settle with her, not take it to court, because you never know what a jury will do, and it'll cost them more money to try to litigate it. So they just decided to settle the case with her. So when she received this money, she could not back up on anything she'd already stated in her statement that she had made to them. So the fact that then there was no action taken against me by the Board of Psychology for another 2 years, that was 4 years later, and then in a year after that, I think it adds up about 6 years after that my license was revoked. And I do not think the Board of Psychology really took into consideration what I'd done in those past 6 years in terms of qualifying to be a medical examiner for the state of California, or by being accepted as a diplomat in forensic psychology, and all the other books that I have in appendix there, books and things I've read, and so forth. That's in page 6 on Appendix A, all the coursework that I did up to the time here of when the board brought the charge against me. Your Honor, that's about what I want to say at this point, I think.
Thank you. Does the Office of the Attorney General have any recommendation?
It does, Your Honor. As you stated earlier, petition bears the burden in this proceeding of showing by clear and convincing evidence of rehabilitation and his present eligibility for a license. The board's regulations in Title 16, Section 1395 of the California Code of Regulations provide 5 criteria for that inquiry. 1, the nature and severity of the acts. 2, evidence of subsequent acts. 3, the time that has elapsed since the commission of the acts. 4, the extent to which applicant has complied with any terms of restitution or other sanctions lawfully imposed against him. And 5, evidence of rehabilitation submitted by petitioner. Now, the acts that petitioner was found to have committed by this board were among the most egregious that can be committed by a psychologist. This board found that petitioner engaged in inappropriate dual relationships with a patient, including a sexual relationship. It found that petitioner shared confidential information he had received from this patient with the patient's minister in an effort to stop her from pursuing a lawsuit against him. And it found that petitioner terminated his treatment of this patient without adequately preparing her for the termination, and that the termination was based on considerations other than treatment considerations. These actions were not only violations of statutory and regulatory prohibitions against sexual misconduct, negligence, and unauthorized disclosure of confidential patient information, but they were among the most fundamental betrayals of the trust that a patient must place in her psychologist.
I object to this, Your Honor. I object to this. I addressed these in what I sent him. He has not really looked at it, nor has he really examined what I have sent to him.
Are these matters that you're discussing now going to the first criteria that's set forth in the
Correct.
regulation? Objections overruled.
Now, petitioner's conduct since the revocation of his license does not mitigate the egregious nature and severity of those acts or indicate rehabilitation. As indicated in today's hearing thus far, petitioner's effort is to try to get this board to focus on its 1997 decision to revoke his license. That is not the proper inquiry for today's hearing, and the people respectfully urges you not to indulge petitioner, but rather focusing on the proper issues for today's hearing. Note that petitioner has failed to provide evidence of any kind of tangible or substantial efforts.
I object to that, Your Honor. I have given him evidence that I have. If you have to take courses for become a diplomat for the forensic psychology.
Okay, this is argument at this point, and he's engaged in argument. He's talking about criteria 5. He has the right to argue these things. Argument will be considered by the board. It's not evidence. Thank you.
Petitioner has failed to demonstrate, petitioner's evidence, fails to demonstrate substantial and tangible efforts to
I object to that. I have demonstrated.
Sir?
You've got letters from people that state that I have.
Okay.
And you've got the documents that I've done.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
you address your comments to me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Not to him.
Okay.
Your objection's overruled.
Okay.
We're going to hear him present his
Okay.
part of the case, just like
Okay.
we tried to let you present your part of the case. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Geez, I sounded like such a psychologist. This is having a bad influence on my judicial demeanor. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as I said, the documentation submitted by petitioner fails to show substantial, tangible efforts to address those specific issues that led to his violations in 1997. Specific issues to develop proper practices and procedures regarding boundaries, appropriate relationships with patients, the maintenance of confidential patient information, and, excuse me, sorry. And ultimately, the most concerning element is petitioner's failure to accept responsibility for his wrongdoing. The people urges the board to draw the most reasonable conclusion that can be drawn from that he has failed to demonstrate or achieve rehabilitation, and his petition for reinstatement must be denied.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have time to respond to all or any of that?
Yes, I'm going to respond to it.
Okay.
First of all, he says I have not demonstrated that I have been rehabilitated. Well, has he failed to consider?
Here's what I understand your evidence to be. Your evidence of rehabilitation consists of those documents that you provided to us that shows your ongoing training since the incident is alleged to have occurred, together with the letter of recommendation from colleagues and associates that were written sometime around 2000,
Yes, sir.
together with a letter from the Long Beach University professor that was written several years ago, and your narrative statement. Is that the case?
Yes, but also an
And
appendix.
that also includes your teaching experience in the last 10 years?
Yes, teaching experience where I'm with all kinds of students, working with all kinds of students, certainly shows that I have character and I have that I have been rehabilitated. I also, in my Appendix B, I read a lot of books on borderline psychology. Patient that I was treating that brought these accusations.
Is that the diagnosis you reached in treating that patient?
No, I wasn't treating her for borderline.
I see.
But the
Can you treat someone for one thing while they have some other condition?
I was treating her for a workers' comp injury.
Okay.
But Dr. Sorka brought, in her notes, she said.
I'm sorry, that was please move on.
So I read a lot of books on borderline psychology and this general field of ethics here, that I have an Appendix B. What do you have to do to demonstrate you're rehabilitated? Well, I think the fact that this happened incident happened in 1991, I think. I practiced for 5 or 6 years. 6 years after that, there was no complaints ever made against me. So on this one isolated incident, that you're saying that I'm a very egregious person, and this is not right, and it's not fair, not reasonable, and this is what I tried to explain in here. And I believe that I could have gotten other letters, but why? The letters you ignored before. People that worked in my office that knew me very closely, wrote these letters. Some of the letters that were, I think, we went back and talked to these people. Some of my, one lady, I hadn't talked to her, Dr. Vonda Pelto. I hadn't even seen her for 15 years, and she has it in here. The letters are in here, and this, that she's recommended me, said she would be glad to hire me, and so forth. So I don't know what it'd take for you if you've got the evidence right here in your book and you're not even looking at it, you see. That's, Your Honor, I see when someone sits up here. You know, one of the things that really disturbs me since I've been teaching criminal psychology is that the prosecuting attorneys often get an idea in their head. And even though if there's many cases of forensic evidence completely against it, and they will not change their mind. We have 1 in 6 people that are on death row are innocent people. We have people that are sentenced because they're not really listened to. And I don't know what else you could say if a person has had 25 or 30 years and one incident has happened with a borderline patient that was out to get $250,000 out of me. I don't know what else you want to, what else would say that I'd have to be rehabilitated. So I had a psychologist letter in here, wrote this letter in 2000. He interviewed me. And evidently that letter was disregarded. So the letters that were sent on my behalf, no one paid any attention to them. Did they just think these people are lying or making this up? Well, that's not fair. The thing is that I stand before people, and I've stood before my classes, that stand up before them, all kinds of people in my classes, and I've never had any complaints about them. In fact, every year they write evaluations of me, and they're very good evaluations. I've been fair and decent and honest in all of those evaluations. Now, I didn't submit those in this. I don't think that's necessary. My point is that I think there was some injustice done to me in the first hearing because we didn't get to recall the person who brought this charge against me. And if you really look at it, if you really studied the case, if the attorney here really studied the case and looked at my comment that I made in the brief that I prepared for Supreme Court, I think you would say that there are some questions there that could really be questions. And I go back to this, that revoking a license is not a punishment to protect people. And there's one incident. Well, I don't think that is fair to base all your conclusion on all the experiences I've had with people. I'm 84 years old, and before I became a marriage family counselor, I was a pastoral counselor, and I was actually a minister back in, I was 20 years as a minister, Christian church. And I have all these that I've probably for 64 years, I've stood before people, I've helped people, I've gone out of my way. At times, I've taken money out of my pocket and give to people that I thought they needed it. I've been very compassionate, and I've been very helpful to people. And perhaps that's what got me into trouble with this lady. I was concerned about her, and I tried to help her in so ways that it set up a circumstantial evidence that some charges were brought against me. So if you look at the complaint and the person who brought the complaint, then you would say, hey, here's this one person who's a borderline person. She had a lot of problems. At the same time she was suing me, she was also collecting money from disability and for a job she hadn't worked on. The thing and this other thing that I want to bring up about egregious act. I went to her minister and offered money to get her not to pay me. Well, if you read the records of the court, the church secretary of that church, it was kind of an offbeat church in California, Long Beach. The minister had called me and wanted to talk to me about a person because she had asked him to call me. I talked to him and I went to see him and I spent some time with him. About a month later, I wrote a check because I make money to my church every month. I sent a check of $200 to their church. The church secretary testified, and the administrative judge just completely didn't even pay any attention to it. Testified that the money was put in the offering plate, and the minister never saw it. Never even saw it. But yet egregious act. I was down there trying to buy him off or something. Well, unfortunately, he died and he couldn't come to court to testify on my behalf, which I think he would have. And when that happened, it indicates that the attorney here has not really done his homework. He has not really looked at the records and looked at what my complaints are and look at those and be able to come back and state that, hey, this was right. Well, it's right or wrong? Well, I think I pointed out that it was wrong because there's no evidence in the administrative hearing that this minister ever saw the money. And I think I have a right to give money to any church. I think they do a good work. It's kind of an offbeat church. I thought they needed some money. I give money to churches all the time. My own church and sometimes other churches, Salvation Army and other things. I think this indicates also part of my good character. I think you spelled out a lot of things that doesn't really talk to my good character. Instead of trying to find out the good character about me, I think the administrative judge is trying to come up with all these fancy ideas that he has. And this is very unfair to me. It's unfair to the people it's unfair to the people that I work with. And when you took me away from my clients, my guys, that really hurt them.
Okay, we're covering ground that was previously
Yeah,
covered.
okay. So, just want to say that. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further? Anything further?
Yes, I would like.
You know what my dad always said? Just because you have $1 doesn't mean you have to spend it.
I understand that. I would just for the benefit of the board, just set some guideposts in the record if they do want to look at substantive evidence regarding the fact that Mr. Stockton has failed to demonstrate rehabilitation. I can be brief, Your Honor, if you would indulge me.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask him what he would consider adequate demonstration that is rehabilitated.
He's really not the subject of this hearing, and nor is he required to answer questions.
Yeah, well.
If you feel the need, if you think you've done such a poor job before, you're welcome to repeat what you've said.
I'm not interested in repeating what I've said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything further?
I would just like to highlight for the board that he's...
Just highlight mean repeat?
No, Your Honor.
Is there something new you'd like to tell us?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So, this isn't Exhibit 1, Petitioner's Petition, documents AGO 051 and henceforth are the only certificates of education that respondent provided since after the revocation of his license. You will notice only one of those arguably go towards any of the issues that led to the revocation of his license, one on California ethics. Beyond that, petitioner has failed to provide.
I was interested in that. Let me just ask.
Yes.
Apparently, the course in California ethics, was that a online course?
You're asking me?
Yes.
No, that was actually conducted by a fellow. He became an administrative judge, and I can't remember his name, but he was.
Was that here in California?
Yeah. It was in
Why was it certified by the state of Florida?
I don't know of anything certified.
Okay, thank you.
There's something certified by the state of Florida. I'm not aware of it.
Okay. No, go ahead.
I'd also like to refer the board to what has been admitted as Exhibit 6, page AGO 060. Now, the first complete paragraph in this exhibit, and this is a statement that petitioner submitted in July of this year as a supplemental document to his petition for reinstatement. The first full paragraph in this document provides the name, contact information, and a diagnosis and details about treatment about a separate former patient of Mr. Stockton. There is no indication that Mr. Stockton has a valid authorization from that patient in writing for the disclosure of that information. There is no indication that Mr. Stockton, he actually explicitly states in that paragraph that he didn't speak with that patient prior to the submission of his petition, which I think speaks to the fact that there's not just the remorse element of rehabilitation, but has he rehabilitated in terms of his practices dealing with confidential client information? And I think that's a clear indication that he has not, to the point where it is safe for him to practice.
Your Honor, this patient I'm referring to is one who wrote a letter to the Board of Psychology and gave me permission to use his name back in 1999.
That's the problem we have with bringing new charges in these proceedings.
Well, may I address?
Sure.
Do you have a copy of that letter, Mr. Stockton? Or may I address the petitioner? I'm sorry, that's what I was asking.
No.
Okay.
Anything else?
That is it.
Thank you. Okay, the matter is done in terms of the presentation of argument. Do any member of the board have any questions they wish to ask of the petitioner? Yes.
I do. Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Horn.
So Dr. Stockton, I do want to say he has his PhD, so he is a doctor.
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay.
Let's refer to him.
I have a couple of questions for you based on the materials you provided for us. So the first is, you talked about having done a lot of soul searching, even if you were innocent or felt you were innocent of how the judge's decision came down, that you had done a lot of soul searching. And whatever you feel comfortable, what did you learn about yourself that may have created problems, say?
One thing I've learned about myself is to be a little more forthcoming with people, not to be so kind sometimes. Sometimes to question them a little bit more. I've helped people, and sometimes they turn around and stab you in the back. And I got to be careful of what kind of people that I deal with so that they don't turn around and hurt you. And that's out of the field of psychology. I'm also in the field of business. Soul searching and in the how could I have led myself to be open to the things that happened so that an accusation could be brought against me. And I talked this over with my wife, and I stayed in there. I talked it over with her. And one of the things I started doing after that was have her picture on my desk. It's a very attractive woman. I'd never had her picture on my desk before.
Whose picture? I'm sorry.
Huh?
Whose picture?
His
on your
wife's.
desk?
My wife's picture. So there's some things that she suggested that I could do not to be, so I would not be open to any accusation brought against me. Also, I prepared intake forms, which spelled out very carefully the boundaries. Now, so is that?
Okay, thanks. Yeah. I have a couple of other questions. If you get your license back, what do you plan to do?
Well, I plan to practice. One of the first things I'll do is probably writing some reports, psychological reports for some friends I know. Maybe writing reports on workers' comp cases, which I did before. And if I move back to California soon, I'll start seeing some patients, probably.
Okay.
And as also stated, I do have a couple books I want to write. One of them, I've already written it. I just got to get it ready to be published, called The Marriage Checkup. Well, can you send out to a publisher? They said, well, your license has been revoked and all of this. I mean, it doesn't look good. And
Okay.
if someone was interviewing you, how can you talk about marriage when you had your license revoked as a marriage and family and child counselor? Another book I'm planning on writing is on ethics, based on values. What values do people have? Then I'm thinking of some ideas about criminal psychology too. And a class I've taught on criminal psychology, which should be said, psychology of criminal conduct and behavior. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things we need to do in our legal system. We need to have more reconciliation. We need to have people that are trained to go out and that helps some of these people do cognitive behavioral therapy. And when that's done to some of these patients, they change because they need to change their belief system, their value system.
Okay. Thanks. I don't mean to interrupt, but I know several people probably have questions. So I've got one more question for you.
Okay.
One of the things we have to look at, and I know you've commented on this, so I'm going to ask you specifically, but one of the things we have to look at is evidence of rehabilitation. So a lot of the stuff you provided was about courses you've taken quite a while ago, and that I'm not sure had specific focus on some of the issues that the court had found before, that the board had found before, that were problematic. So I want to ask you, what have you done specifically to rehabilitate yourself with regard to the kinds of things that you lost your license for?
I was just sitting last summer on a workshop presented about the laws, state of California, psychology, and all of that. So I have done a lot of courses. I don't know if I put that in there, but I've taken a lot of courses. I've read a lot of things in terms of ethics, in dealing with ethics, and I've taken other courses in terms of different types of therapy, treating borderline people and other types of therapies. The mindfulness therapy and all that I've kept up on, and I've done that. So to be rehabilitated, I think the biggest thing that I can say about being rehabilitation, look at my history, look at my record.
Okay.
If I'm a person out here a danger to people, I have a lot of beautiful girls in my psychology classes. If I'm a kind of a person who's out here to be making all bad gestures on people, I'd certainly give the opportunity. I think that it demonstrates that I've been rehabilitated. The fact of what my life has been in the last 16 years, it speaks for itself.
So can I ask you one more question
Yes.
about that, and then I'll be
Okay,
done?
thank you.
you diagnosed this woman originally as having, I think you said, major depression, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes.
You later came to believe that she probably also had, would be diagnosed as having a borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, that's what they.
And you said that you've read a lot of books about.
Yeah. I have.
Can you tell me what you've learned, say, in your reading that maybe might prepare you to see something like that earlier?
Well, you could probably pick it out by the way that, actually, you pick that out by the way that they interact and they try to hold on to relationships. They try to hold on to relationships, are very manipulative, and goes back to, well, they do a lot about changing minds. One moment something's really dramatic, and the next moment they're depressed, and back and forth. So, and sometimes the things can be said to them that they can react to with depression, and you have to be careful when we're dealing with those. This was a diagnosis given by Dr. Gaynor at the hearing, said that she was borderline.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Does any other member of the board have Dr. Erickson?
Hello, Dr. Stockton. Hello, Dr. Stockton. A couple of questions. One of the issues here seems to be the question of whether you were wrongly accused and found to have done something that you didn't do versus other possibilities such as denial or disavowing that something happened. What I'd like you to consider, and this is a hypothetical, if you were a licensed psychologist and you had a patient come to you who had been licensed but had lost their license because of having sex with a patient, how would you go about helping that person rehabilitate? And how would you help them look at whether they were denying what happened or had been wrongfully charged?
I would, if they came to me stating that, I would try to understand what was the background, what was the motivation, what was the attitude that they have towards their responsibility as psychologists in terms of boundaries and bound relationships, and why that they stepped over those boundaries, and what would they do to keep from stepping over those boundaries in the future. And if they had sex with more, one or two people, I suppose I would also talk about their behavior in terms of being able to regulate themselves in terms of managing their own controls, and why are they how do they get out of control, and how can they keep from getting out of control in the future. Okay. And and that goes back to talking about attitudes and values that they have.
But let's suppose, thank you, but let's suppose the patient that's coming to you says that this never happened. How would you help them with rehabilitation?
Well, you're rehabilitating somebody for something that they didn't do? You're asking me that?
I don't know whether they did it. They're saying they didn't do it.
Oh, they did? Well, I would say, well, let's look at some, you've been accused of this. There's some things you need to do. There's some books that are out here that's written on boundary, how to respect boundaries, and what the boundaries in psychology and so forth. And so I would talk with them about that, those boundary issues, and what they could keep from doing to expose themselves from stepping over the boundary that someone might accuse them or of something, and especially if they already had sex with a patient, so that it never happens again. See, if they've been before the board or something.
No further questions for now.
Thank you. Are there any other
Yes.
questions? Yes.
Yes, I have a question. I'm looking at this statement that was made, and help me to understand this. It says that I'm seeking for justice, but from another perspective, I'm asking for mercy. I believe I have done no harm. Help me understand that.
Yes, that was written to the chairman of the board, I believe. And what I was saying, I was wanting justice, but he thinks I'm guilty, so I'm asking for justice from his point of view. I'm asking for justice from his point of view. I'm asking for mercy because he thinks that I'm guilty. So therefore, I said, "Forgive me. It's not going to happen again."
I was
It happened in
focusing.
the first place. I'm not going to have someone be able to bring a charge against me. I did some things that set me up for this, circumstantial things. I know I did that. And so that's what I'm talking about there, I think.
But I was really focusing on that last one, and I'll be done, where you said, I believe I have done no harm.
I did not harm this lady. There was nothing really presented in the board hearing that she was harmed by anything I did.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
At various points in time, you've described yourself as the victim, as opposed to the complainant being the victim. You've described yourself as being a victim of injustice, a victim of failure of support of the board to rehabilitate you. Do you still consider yourself a victim?
And the fact that I feel that I was unjustly treated, being a victim, you have to get over that, you know. But, yeah, I think in some ways I was a victim, maybe unknowingly a victim. And that's not what the board wants to hear. They want to know, put you in a catch-22, you know. If I tell my opinion, I'm in denial. And you don't want a person in denial. If I tell what you want to hear, then I'm not true to myself. And it puts you in a catch-22. And in some ways, if you look at the things that I think in the hearing, I think in some ways I was a victim. I was a victim. I didn't have a good attorney. That was my own fault, probably, to defend me. I was a victim because charge was brought after it was already settled with this lady. She got $225,000 or something of money, and you have to understand. You don't understand her. I mean, you don't know her, and so it's hard to. It sounds, you know, like she's a. Well,
let me ask you the question in a different way.
okay.
Do you think she was in any way a victim?
No, I don't think she was a victim. I think and again, when I say that, it sounds kind of harsh and rude, but you don't know the circumstances. And you don't know the circumstances of her, what she did. This lady testified that she had 50 jobs and never kept any of them. The lady also, when she was working on the workers' compensation cases, wanted me to file a check. She was saying, well, can we get anything to say that my boss came on to me sexually? And I said, no, you have no proof of that. So there's things that, you know, when you look at her, you don't know her, and so it looks like she was really a victim, being taken advantage of by this psychologist. The last thing I want to do was have an affair with her, but it looks like that, and there's circumstantial evidence.
Let me ask you a related question. What is it related to the original charges that causes you remorse today?
Sure.
What is it in your behavior toward the complainant that causes you remorse?
The charge that caused me remorse.
What
Is there
is,
anything you feel bad about?
Yeah, I feel bad that I had not been aware of what she was trying to set me up for.
Okay.
I felt bad about that. At this, again, she was seeing 3 different men at that time and was trying to carry on an affair with a married man that was in Sacramento, wanted me to read a letter she was sending to him. And I said, don't send it. He's married. Yeah, there's things that I'm remorseful about. And I probably should have been a little more harsh with her in some ways. And sort of, it is, she met me at a restaurant, Jack in the Box. And,
She called it a Carl's.
She calls it Carl's Jr. I forgot what's Carl. She called it one word name, but it's a different one. But anyway, wanted me to go over a school paper, that article she's reading for the paper. Well, what are you going to do if you're in a Carl's Jr. or Jack in the Box or somewhere? Client comes over and sits down beside you. You're going to say, hey, get out of here? No. She wanted some help with a paper, so I said, look, here's what you need to do. And,
I think you've actually responded to my question, Dr. Stockton. So I don't want to go too far afield, nor do I want to discuss too much confidential information about the complainant. You did have an order to pay over $31,000 as a result of the original case. Is that correct?
I guess so. I'm not sure.
Have you paid any money toward that?
No, I haven't any money, and I can't pay any money. I'm asking the court to forgive that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think you answered the question I was going to ask.
Okay. I have a question. Do you think you were treated fairly today by the board in this proceeding?
I think I'm treated fairly by you.
Well, how about by the board members?
Oh, the board members, yes.
Sure, okay.
I guess I've answered any other questions. I'll be glad to answer.
Sure. I want to make sure when you go out of here that you think you've had a fair hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything further?
Nothing further.
Anything further? I'd like to thank each of you very much. You've presented your case certainly as well as you could. It's a tough thing, and we'll be in closed session here to discuss this in just a few moments. So everyone stand up and stretch, and that's what we'll do.
Maybe take a 5-minute break?
Yeah. 5-minute break, 10-minute break. I'm lenient with time. Time is nothing to lawyers.
Especially when you're billing. Okay, we're going back into open session. We did leave one agenda item from this morning that we were going to try to finish by the end of the day, which shouldn't take us too long. Also want to remind all the board members that we do have disciplinary materials that we should be giving back to Ms. Monterrubio at the end of today so that she can appropriately dispose of them. And agenda item number 5 was the minutes of the meeting of Thursday and Friday, August 18th and 19th, 2016. Is there anyone that has comments on the minutes? I had a few. First page, line 42. It says, talking about foundation, Camp Ronald McDonald, and that, I think it should say, and that she said, or
What line is that?
it's line 42. It's like, somehow it doesn't read, and I think it said, we should just strike that. So that would just say, said she is very excited to join the board. Okay. On line 57 on page 2, and I'm sorry I didn't get this to our scriveners earlier on, but I did want to catch it as long as we had the time to do it. Dr. Phillips thanked him for his comments, plural, not comment. I'm trying to keep up with Jackie. How does Alex Siegel spell his name? G-A-L or G-E-L?
G-E-L.
Okay, so there's, Dr. Siegel's name appears incorrectly. It should be E-L, and that should be changed throughout. I always like those kind of changes when I'm editing things because you just do a universal search. What's 114? Oh. Well, let me give you my comments and then we'll go to yours, okay? But damn. Line 412, it says, Dr. Phillips said that if someone practices interjurisdictional, I think that should probably actually read interjurisdictionally. And the paragraph that starts on line 494.
I'm sorry, what line item was that?
It's 412. There's no page numbers on here, but going to line 494, that paragraph, I got a little confused reading it. It says, Dr. Siegel says examinations for licensure are content validity. I think it should say are based in content validity or based on content validity.
Yeah. Yeah, or based on, that's fine, content validity versus, or as opposed to predictive validity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on line, and I don't want to rush through this. So we good with that? Okay, on line 500, are more knowledgeable than the person scoring 500 because it is a selection content.
Which line is that?
That's on line 500. So I'm not. Is it?
I had to go back and review that comment.
I don't know what it means.
Because there was a lot of information that he provided. I don't know if this is on. But he just said content validity exam. That's what he called it. So I'm not sure what he meant by
Oh,
that.
yeah, so to take out the selection, I think. He said it would be difficult, because it was a content validity examination.
That's not
That's not
exactly
a-
why. I don't know how to word this. It's essentially a pass-fail exam. Oh, I'm sorry. It's essentially a pass-fail exam. That's really what it is. You're selecting people, so it's a selection criterion. And the selection is you passed or you failed. Not that you scored higher so you have more knowledge, but it's, did you pass it or did you fail it? That's really all that's looked at. It's around that pass point. So I would say that it's selection
Criterion?
yeah.
Exam.
Criterion. Exam,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Let me just see if I've got anything else. I think that was it for me. Ms. Brunel?
I just caught on 114, Dr. Erickson. Thank you. Dr. Erickson thanked Ms. Monterrubio, her for the report.
For her report?
Or for the
Or for the
report.
report?
Yeah.
And just drop that.
Take out her.
I may have actually said it the way it's.
Are there any more comments? Ms. Jones?
Yes. On line number 68, after it says departing board members, part of my reason for stating this was to name them. Can we name them after the departing board members? This is where we talked about the cards, because I wanted to put it on
Would have
record.
been Dr. Gallardo.
I'm about to say, Dr.
Okay.
Miguel Gallardo, Dr. Andrew Harlem, and Linda Starr.
I think we should say Ms. Linda Starr.
Miss Linda Starr, please, yes. And I did them in alphabetical order, not in any other type of order. And if we could update on line 997. So it would, that sentence would, that starts on 996 would read, Ms. Jones said that moving fast through the work should never be the board's only goal, especially in light of the value of transparency. Because I wanted to make sure that that was part of the capture of what we talked about.
What line was that again?
Line 997.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. Ms. Jones said that moving fast through the work should never be the board's only goal, especially in light of our value of transparency. That's the full concept.
Thank you.
That's all.
Is that it?
And I guess the other thing on lines number 197, 198, and 201, we have newsletter, sometimes capitalized and sometimes lowercase, so just for consistency, we should make them one way or the other.
Yeah. Further comments, Ms. Jones?
No, that's all.
Okay. Does any other board members have any comments? Would someone like to, or, somebody would like to make a motion?
I move that the minutes of August the 15th be approved with corrections noted.
I second.
Is there any discussion among the board? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, Ms. Burns, would you please call the roll? As
Moves with corrections noted, I think.
McQuay-Badoo,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Bernal,
Aye.